Hey friends. Glad you're here at Fiction Blue. We've cooked up something special. What if Harry used empathy magic to force Vernon and Petunia to feel all the pain they caused him? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The weight of everything. The summer smelled like cut grass and petrol fumes and a particular kind of quiet that only existed on Privet Drive, the quiet of people who had decided, collectively and without discussion, that nothing unusual would ever happen here. Harry Potter sat on the roof of the garden shed and watched a sparrow pick at something dead in the neighbor's gutter, and he thought about Sirius. He'd been doing that a lot. Thinking about Sirius. Not in the way people probably expected, not the wailing, chest-tearing grief that showed up in films when someone lost a godfather. It was quieter than that. More like reaching for something in a familiar pocket and finding it gone. Again and again and again. The mind kept forgetting. The body kept remembering. He'd been out here since 5 in the morning. The Dursleys didn't know he slept on the shed roof sometimes. Or if they did, they'd decided that telling him to get down was more effort than ignoring it. Either way suited Harry fine. Hedwig was asleep in her cage inside, tucked under her wing in that self-contained way owls had that always made Harry slightly envious. He'd sent 2 letters last night, one to Ron, one to Hermione, both of them saying roughly nothing. I'm fine. Privet Drive is Privet Drive. Hope you're alright. The kind of letter that said, I am not ready to talk about it yet but I am still here. He watched the sparrow give up on whatever it had found and fly away, and he thought, 5 weeks. 5 weeks since the Department of Mysteries. Since the veil. Since Bellatrix Lestrange had laughed. He hadn't cried yet. He wasn't sure he could. It felt like the grief was too large for the mechanics of crying to do anything useful with it. Like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. The back door of number 4 banged open below him. Boy. Vernon's voice, thick and self-important, rolled out across the garden like a wave of warm, unpleasant air. Get down from there. Breakfast. Harry looked down at his uncle, broad, purple-necked, squinting up at him with the expression of a man who had decided something was an affront to decency without being able to say exactly what. Vernon Dursley was wearing his Saturday clothes, which were almost identical to his weekday clothes except for a different shade of beige, and he was holding a spatula. Coming, Harry said, and meant nothing by it. He climbed down from the shed roof with the ease of someone who had been doing it for years, dropped lightly onto the fence post, then the ground, and walked toward the back door without looking at his uncle. Vernon made a sound, something between a grunt and a disapproval, and went back inside. The kitchen was bright and crowded with the smell of bacon and toast and the particular oppressive warmth of a family that had arranged itself to occupy every surface and bit of oxygen in a room. Petunia was at the hob, her back straight as a ruler, her movements precise and economical. Dudley was already at the table with a plate stacked high enough to constitute a structural hazard, scrolling through something on his phone with the glazed contentment of a boy who had never once in his life wondered if he deserved his breakfast. Harry sat down at his usual spot, the corner, the chair with the slightly shorter leg, the one position so that everyone else was looking away from him by default, and reached for the one remaining piece of toast. Petunia's hand beat him to the bread basket. She refilled it with 2 fresh slices and set it down in front of Dudley without looking at Harry. He pulled the last piece of original toast toward him and didn't say anything. This was the Dursley household's great unspoken contract. Harry would eat what was left and be grateful it existed, and in exchange they would all pretend this was normal and reasonable and not, in fact, the kind of thing that social workers existed to prevent. Dudley's got his friend Marco coming this afternoon, Petunia said, to Vernon, to the room, to the general principle of a conversation that excluded Harry by design. I'll need you to move your car out of the drive. Emmichem. Vernon was loading his plate with architectural precision. What about I've sorted the garden already. Good. Good. Harry ate his toast. It was slightly burnt on one edge and dry in the middle, and it tasted like nothing much, which was fine. He wasn't hungry. He'd stopped being reliably hungry about 3 weeks ago, which he recognized intellectually as a symptom of something but couldn't quite bring himself to address. He was reaching for the orange juice when Vernon said, without looking up from his eggs, "You'll stay out of the way this afternoon." "I will," Harry said. "I mean it. None of your business." "None of it." "None of my business," Harry repeated neutrally. "You know what I mean." "I genuinely don't." Vernon looked up then. His small eyes, the color of old pudding, Harry had always thought, fixed on Harry with the expression of a man who had decided that the correct response to everything was a kind of preemptive offense. "Don't get smart with me, boy." "I wasn't," Harry said. "I actually don't know what you mean. You said none of my business, and my business is usually just existing in the house that I'm legally required to be in, so I'm a bit unclear on what specifically you want me to avoid." The spatula tapped the edge of the table once. A warning sound. Dudley looked up from his phone. Petunia had gone very still at the sink. And Harry realized, sitting there with his half-eaten piece of toast and his empty orange juice glass, that something was different this morning. Something had shifted in the 3 inches of air between himself and the rest of the world. He couldn't have said what exactly. It felt like the atmospheric pressure before a storm, that thick, particular tension where the sky hasn't done anything yet but your body already knows. He'd been feeling it for 3 days, actually. Since the nightmare on Wednesday, the one about the veil, the one where Sirius fell and kept falling and the sound it made was laughter, since waking up from that at 2 in the morning with his scar burning and his hands shaking and the absolute, bone-deep knowledge that he was utterly alone in this house with no one who would check on him, no one who would knock on the door, no one who even knew his name in anything other than the most technically literal sense. Something had been building since then. Like water behind glass. "You want to know what your business is?" Vernon said, and his voice had dropped into that register, the low, deliberate one that was worse than shouting, the one that meant he had decided to be reasonable and calm in the way that a hammer is reasonable and calm before it hits something. "Your business is staying invisible. Not bothering the neighbors. Not making Petunia anxious with you're looking at things. You've been sitting on that shed every morning staring into space and Mrs. Henderson next door asked Petunia about it and that is your business, boy. Making sure nothing freakish spills over into our lives." Harry looked at him. Just looked. Without flinching, without dropping his eyes, without doing any of the dozen small submissive adjustments he'd trained himself into over 16 years of this man's voice. Vernon blinked. He wasn't used to being looked at. "Mrs. Henderson," Harry said, "can look the other way." The silence that followed that sentence was remarkable. Even Dudley put his phone down. Vernon's face went through several colors in rapid succession, beige to red to something approaching maroon, and the spatula hit the table properly this time, hard enough to rattle the butter dish. "Now you listen to me, I'm grieving," Harry said. The word came out flat and certain, and it surprised him slightly, the way honest words often did when you'd spent years editing them out. "My godfather died 5 weeks ago. I watched it happen. I've been sitting on the shed because I can't sleep and there's nowhere else to go, and I'm not making faces at Mrs. Henderson, I'm just existing. Which is all I've ever done in this house. Existed. Badly, by your standards, but I've been doing my best." Petunia made a small sound. Not quite a word. "Don't you dare," Vernon started. "He was the only family I had," Harry said, and his voice didn't break, but something in the room did. "Not you. Not this house. Him. And he's gone because of me, because people keep using me to get to things they want, and I'm 16 years old and I'm sitting in a house with people who have spent my entire life making it extremely clear that my existence is an inconvenience, and I am just asking, to sit on the shed in the morning without it being a problem." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Then Vernon said, "Are you finished?" "Not really," Harry said. "You are." Vernon stood up. He was a large man, he'd always used that as a kind of argument, the way some men did, letting their size make points their words couldn't quite manage. He pointed the spatula at Harry like a barrister making a final argument. You want to talk about your lot in life? Let's talk about your lot in life. You eat our food. You live under our roof. You have done since you were a baby that your useless parents left on our doorstep like something the cat dragged in, Vernon. Petunia's voice was wire-thin. And we have provided for you, fed you, housed you, kept you away from what you are for 16 years out of the goodness of our hearts. Something happened in Harry's chest. It wasn't anger exactly. He'd felt anger before. This was older than anger and quieter and deeper, and it moved through him like a tide coming in, inevitable, indifferent to the shape of the shore. He felt it reach the backs of his eyes and the palms of his hands and the base of his throat all at once. The goodness of their hearts. Locked in a cupboard under the stairs until he was 11 years old. The goodness of their hearts. Not told about magic, about his parents, about himself. Given Dudley's cast-off clothes and a cot mattress and the absolute minimum of everything, food, attention, warmth, the basic acknowledgement that he was a person with feelings and those feelings were real. The goodness of their hearts. He'd had nightmares in that cupboard. He'd woken up in that cupboard with nowhere to be afraid in, not enough room to sit up straight. He'd eaten cold beans from the tin in that cupboard because Petunia had forgotten, again, or hadn't forgotten, had simply decided, and he told himself it was fine, it was fine, it was fine, right up until the moment he was 11 and Hagrid had come and the word fine had stopped being available. The goodness. And not once, Vernon was saying, leaning forward, spatula still raised, not once have you shown a moment of gratitude. The glass of orange juice exploded. Not violently, not like a spell had hit it. More like it had decided, quietly and of its own accord, that it was done holding itself together. It cracked outward from the inside, and the orange juice spread across the table in a slow, almost elegant fan, and the light in the kitchen shifted, just slightly, just enough, as though the air itself had changed density. Vernon stopped talking. The spatula was still raised, but he had gone completely still, the way animals went still when they sensed something they didn't have a name for. Harry hadn't done that. He didn't think he'd done that. But the thing in his chest was still building, that tide, that pressure, and his hands on the table were absolutely steady, and he was looking at Vernon Dursley with an attention that had nothing to do with fear. You want to talk about gratitude, Harry said, very quietly. All right. Let's do that. He stood up. He wasn't a large person, he'd never been large, the Dursleys had made sure of that in the early years, and genetics had never fully corrected for it, but something about the way he stood made the kitchen feel smaller. Or maybe it made him feel larger. Dudley pushed his chair back 6 inches without seeming to notice he'd done it. I've been grateful my whole life in this house, Harry said. I've been grateful for the cupboard. Grateful for the leftovers. Grateful that you let me stay, that you didn't, whatever came next if you hadn't. I've spent 16 years making myself small enough to fit in whatever space you left for me, and I have never once, not once, made you feel even a fraction of what that was like. Harry, Petunia said. Her voice was strange. Careful. He looked at her. She met his eyes for half a second, then looked away. That small, reflexive looking away. He'd seen it 10,000 times. She always knew. That was the thing about Petunia. Vernon had bullied himself into a genuine belief in his own righteousness, had constructed a whole personal mythology around it, but Petunia had always known. He could see it in the way she went still when Vernon said something truly terrible, in the way she sometimes left food on the counter just within his reach on the nights she was feeling something she wouldn't give a name to. She knew. She had always known. And she had chosen the life she had instead. You want to understand, Harry said, what it was actually like. He wasn't sure where the words came from. They didn't feel like something he was deciding, they felt like something that was just true, the way gravity was true, the way the fact of Sirius being gone was true. A fact that existed in the world regardless of what anyone felt about it. Harry, don't, Petunia started. The thing in his chest moved. It was the only way he could describe it later, to himself, in the long hours when he turned it over trying to understand what had happened. The thing, the pressure, the tide, the accumulated weight of 16 years of small hurts and large ones, moved. Not outward exactly. Sideways. Like a river changing course, redirecting its flow from inward to outward, from contained to shared. He had never done wandless magic before. Not deliberately. Accidental magic, yes, as a child, constantly, enough to make Vernon's face turn colors on a weekly basis. But not this. Not like this. This didn't feel like a spell. It didn't feel like magic the way he'd learned it at Hogwarts. It felt like something much older, like the difference between a built road and the natural tendency of water to find the lowest point. He felt it leave him. Vernon Dursley sat down hard. Not slowly, not with any choice in it. One moment he was standing, spatula raised, and the next he was in his chair as though his legs had simply stopped being interested in the project. His face had gone from maroon to a grey-white that Harry had never seen on it before, and his mouth was open but not making sounds. Petunia gripped the edge of the sink with both hands. Dudley had pressed himself back against the wall. The feeling lasted, Harry thought, later, perhaps 40 seconds. Maybe less. It was hard to measure because time did something strange in the middle of it, stretching and compressing unevenly the way it did in nightmares. What Vernon felt, Harry knew this because he could feel the shape of what was being transferred, could feel it like a rope in his hands, was not any single specific memory. It was not the image of a small boy in a cupboard, not the sound of a lock turning, not the specific texture of neglect. It was the cumulative emotional weight of all of it. 16 years compressed into 40 seconds. Not so much what had happened as what it had felt like to be the person it happened to. The loneliness with no edges, the kind that you're born into and have never known anything different from, so it doesn't even have a name yet. The hunger that becomes background noise. The specific despair of a child who wants, above everything, just to be looked at kindly, and has learned to need less and less until the wanting itself becomes shameful. The hope that never quite dies and never quite gets answered. The realization, learned and relearned, that the adults in your life have decided you are not worth the same quality of care as other children, and the years-long work of trying to figure out what you did to deserve that. All of it. The actual weight. Vernon made a sound that Harry had never heard from him. Low. Cracked. Petunia had both hands over her mouth. She was shaking, not dramatically, not with the performance of someone who was used to being seen, but with the small, private shaking of someone whose body was processing something their mind couldn't organize fast enough. Tears were running down her face and she looked absolutely astonished by them, as though she hadn't known they were there. And then it stopped. The tide went out. The pressure released. Harry stood at the kitchen table and felt completely hollow, scraped out and quiet and very tired, and the morning light coming through the window over the sink was perfectly ordinary and the smell of bacon was still in the air and his half-eaten toast was sitting where he'd left it. Vernon's head was bowed. Both hands flat on the table. Petunia had slid down the cabinet and was sitting on the kitchen floor with her knees up and her face turned away. Dudley was pressed against the far wall, staring at Harry with an expression that had worked its way through shock and terror and landed somewhere Harry hadn't expected. It looked, honestly, like devastation. "Blimey," Dudley said. His voice was very small. Quite unlike himself. Harry sat back down. He picked up his toast. He took a bite. His hands were steady. He wasn't sure why, given that every other part of him felt like a wrung-out cloth, but his hands were steady, and he ate the toast, and the three Dursleys stayed wherever the last 40 seconds had put them, and the morning continued. After a while, 2 minutes, maybe 3, Vernon lifted his head. His eyes were red at the rims, which Harry had never seen before and found slightly disturbing, the way you'd find anything disturbing that overturned a basic assumption about the laws of reality. "What?" Vernon said. His voice had no texture. "What was that?" "That was what it felt like," Harry said. "Living here." Vernon stared at him. Not all of it, Harry added honestly. I don't think I could have shown you all of it in one go. But enough. You can't, Vernon stopped. Tried again. You're not allowed to use, no, Harry said. I'm not. And I expect someone's going to show up about that fairly shortly. He glanced at the window. But I think we both know that what you're feeling right now is the point, not the rule I broke to make you feel it. Vernon opened his mouth, and then did something extraordinary. He closed it again without saying anything. Harry watched him blink twice, slowly, as though recalibrating. As though finding that the collection of justifications and dismissals that he'd kept stacked at the front of his mind, the ones he reached for automatically whenever anything required him to think about the boy, really think about him, had been, very quietly, cleared away. Petunia was still on the floor. Harry looked at her, really looked, the way he'd spent years trying not to because it made things harder. She was 40-something and she looked, right now, much younger than that. She looked like someone who had just picked up something she deliberately set down a long time ago and found it was much heavier than she remembered. I know you knew, Harry said to her. Not unkindly. Just factually. That's all. I'm not going to do anything else. I just wanted you to know that I know you knew. Petunia pressed her hand over her eyes. Dudley said, quietly, from his position against the wall, how long? Harry looked at him. How long was it like that? Dudley asked. He was looking at the spot on the table where the orange juice had spread, as though he couldn't quite manage to look at Harry directly. All of that. How long was it like that? Since before I can remember, Harry said. Dudley absorbed that. He was 16 years old and not, Harry thought, stupid, not as stupid as he'd been raised to be, which was different. He had the look of someone who was rearranging furniture inside their own head to fit something that hadn't had any room before. Right, Dudley said, and said nothing else. Harry finished his toast. Outside, in the perfectly ordinary morning of Privet Drive, a car was starting down the road, and someone 2 gardens over was mowing their lawn, and the sky was the flat, unoffended blue of early summer. It was 8:43 in the morning and in the kitchen of number 4 Harry Potter sat with his empty plate and the wreckage of an orange juice glass and the quiet aftermath of something that could not be undone, and he felt, underneath the exhaustion and the grief and the enormous uncertainty of what came next, he felt something small and stubborn and persistent. Something that might have been relief. He hadn't been planning it. He hadn't trained for it. He didn't understand the mechanics of what had happened and he wasn't sure he could do it again. But it had happened, and it had been real, and for the first time in his life the Dursleys had been given no choice about whether or not to receive the truth of what they'd done. That mattered. He wasn't sure yet what it would change. But it mattered. He got up, rinsed his plate, and went upstairs. He was asleep within 4 minutes of lying down, which was the longest unbroken sleep he'd managed since the Department of Mysteries. He didn't dream about the veil. He didn't dream about anything at all. He woke at noon to the sound of owls. Not just Hedwig. Hedwig was sitting on the windowsill giving him a look of intense, personal concern, the kind that suggested she had opinions about recent events but was choosing to withhold them for the moment. The owls were outside. Several of them. He could hear their wings and the particular bureaucratic tapping of ministry-trained birds who were used to delivering things urgently. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the events of the morning settle into permanence in the way that significant things did, the way you could almost feel a memory taking its final shape, deciding what it was going to mean. Then he got up, crossed to the window, and opened it. 4 owls came in at once. 3 of them were anonymous gray birds with official-looking letters. The 4th was the Weasley family owl, Errol, who collided with the lamp and then sat on the desk looking personally offended by physics. Harry picked up the most official-looking letter first. Ministry seal. He tore it open. Dear Mr. Potter, it has come to the attention of the improper use of magic office that underage magic was performed at your registered address at 9:04 this morning. However, given certain exceptional circumstances and following direct consultation with the head of magical law enforcement, this matter has been referred to the Office of Extraordinary Magical Events rather than processed through the standard underage violation procedure. A representative will be arriving at your address this afternoon. Please remain at home. Yours, Mafalda Hopkirk. Improper use of magic office so. Not expelled. Not yet, anyway. Extraordinary Magical Events was a department Harry had never heard of, which in his experience was either a very good or a very bad sign with no middle ground. The second letter was from the order. He recognized the handwriting, Molly Weasley, cramped and rapid, the quill clearly barely keeping up with her thoughts. Harry dear, we know something's happened, Mundungus is frantic, don't worry about the ministry letter, Arthur's handling it, someone is coming to you, stay put, please, everything is being sorted, are you all right? Write back immediately. Love, Molly. The third letter was official in a different way, a crisp, cream-colored envelope with Hogwarts seal. He set it aside without opening it. He had a feeling he knew who it was from, and he wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Errol presented Ron's letter with the pained dignity of a creature who was too professional for the indignity of his current situation. Harry took it. Harry, Mum is losing her mind. Dad just flew home in the middle of the day. No one's telling me anything, which means something big. Hermione's coming to the Burrow next week anyway, so if you're moved here before then she'll know what's going on before I do, which is not fair. Are you all right? What happened? Whatever it was, just write back. Okay. Just write back. Ron. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and wrote, I'm fine, yes, something happened, yes I'll explain, stop worrying, on a scrap of parchment and attached it to Errol, who departed with the air of a creature that had done its best in an imperfect world. He wrote nothing in response to the ministry letter, because he didn't need to, they were coming whether he responded or not. He didn't write to Dumbledore. He looked at the Hogwarts envelope for a long moment, sitting there on his desk between Hedwig's empty water dish and a dog-eared copy of Advanced Potion Making. Then he picked it up, put it in the drawer of his desk, and pushed the drawer closed. Not yet. He changed clothes, washed his face, and went downstairs. The kitchen had been cleaned, the broken glass gone, the orange juice mopped up, the table reset with the particular precision that Petunia applied to things when she needed her hands to be busy while her mind worked through something. She was at the sink again. Vernon was not visible, which meant he was either in his study or had gone for a walk, both of which were things he did when he was feeling something he didn't want to feel in company. Dudley was on the sofa in the living room with no phone in his hand, which was notable enough to register. He was looking at the ceiling. Harry made himself a sandwich, properly, from the good bread in the middle of the loaf, with actual fillings, an act of minor domestic autonomy that he'd been performing more confidently since 5th year and had never been directly challenged on, and sat at the kitchen table. Petunia didn't turn around for a long time. When she did, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. It wasn't guilt exactly, or it wasn't only guilt. It was more like the look of someone who had been carrying a particular lie for so long that they'd stopped being able to tell where the lie ended and where they began, and something had just removed the option of pretending the distinction didn't exist. The ministry's coming, Harry said. I assumed, she said. Her voice was steady. Impressive, really, given everything. Possibly the order too. She nodded. I'm not going to apologize, Harry said. For this morning. I need you to know that. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face, complicated and quick and not quite finished. I know, she said. And then, before Harry could parse what that meant, she turned back to the sink. He ate his sandwich and listened to the neighborhood sounds drifting through the window, a lawnmower, a child somewhere laughing, the domestic ordinary afternoon of a street that had no idea that the world was rearranging itself a few rooms at a time, and he waited. The ministry arrived at 2 o'clock. Not Mafalda Hopkirk, someone else. A small, sharp-faced woman Harry had never seen before named Castlereagh, from the Office of Extraordinary Magical Events, who shook Harry's hand with the brisk professionalism of someone who had decided to be interested rather than alarmed, and who produced from her briefcase a set of instruments Harry didn't recognize that she set up on the kitchen table without explanation. "Sit down, please, Mr. Potter," she said. "I'll explain what I'm measuring in a moment, and no, you're not in trouble. The underage restriction has been suspended for the purpose of this assessment, which the head of the department authorized at 11 this morning. Do the people in this house understand they're not to interrupt?" "Probably," Harry said. "The tall one might." "Ah." She glanced at Vernon, who had emerged from his study when the doorbell rang and was now standing in the kitchen doorway with the expression of a man who has suffered an extraordinary morning and was finding the afternoon equally confrontational. "Sir, I'd ask you to please wait in the next room. Ministry business." Vernon looked at her, looked at Harry, and, without saying a single word, went back into the hallway. Harry heard him go into the living room, where he joined Dudley in the ceiling-staring enterprise. "Right," said Castlereagh, settling herself at the table. "Tell me what you did." "I'm not entirely sure," Harry said honestly. "I was arguing with my uncle and there was pressure building in my chest and then it moved outward and they felt what they'd done," Castlereagh said. She wasn't asking. "Yes." She made a note. "For how long have you had this capacity?" "As far as I know, this morning was the first time." She made another note. "Have you ever, in the past, experienced something similar but less complete? Moments where people suddenly seem to understand your emotional state with unusual clarity? Where your grief or anger communicated itself to a room nonverbally in a way that seemed to go beyond normal human expression?" Harry thought about it. Thought about Dumbledore's office after the Triwizard Tournament, the way the headmaster had looked at him. Thought about the night in 5th year when he'd raged at Ron and Hermione in the Gryffindor common room and they'd both gone so quiet, so carefully still. Thought about the DA meetings, the way people had sometimes looked at him with an expression that wasn't just respect or attention but something more immediate, something that felt like contact. "Maybe," he said. "I've never thought about it that way." "You wouldn't have," Castlereagh said, not unkindly. "It's a passive form in early development. Most witches and wizards who carry this ability manifest it for years as simple emotional resonance, charisma, persuasiveness, the tendency to make people understand you more completely than you actually articulate. The active form, what you did this morning, that's the first conscious expression." She set down her quill. "Mr. Potter. What you performed this morning is called effective transference. It's extraordinarily rare. We have records of 17 confirmed cases in the last 4 centuries. It is not dark magic. It is not on any restricted list. It is, in the classification system of this office, an innate magical ability, which places it in the same category as Parseltongue or metamorph magic, not learned, not cast, not reproducible by spell." She paused. "Which means it's yours. Not regulated. Not removable. Not something we can do very much about at all, frankly." Harry looked at her. "The Ministry's official position," she continued, picking her quill back up, "is that this morning's event was an involuntary expression of an innate magical ability triggered under extreme emotional duress, and that no further regulatory action is required." A small pause. "The unofficial position of the head of magical law enforcement, who is an old friend of your late godfather's and sends his regards, is that whatever you did to the people in this house, it was a long time coming." Harry was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," she said, closing her briefcase, "I file my report, and the Ministry adds effective transference to your file, and the world continues. Although," she stood, straightening her robes, "I'd expect you'll be hearing from people who are considerably more interested in this ability than I am. The Ministry's interest is bureaucratic. Others will be rather less so." She was at the door when she turned back. "Mr. Potter, you had 16 years of material to work with. The fact that you waited until now suggests a restraint that the 17 people in my records didn't always demonstrate." She said it simply, without drama. "That matters." And then she was gone, and the front door closed, and the house was quiet again. Harry sat at the kitchen table in the afternoon light and turned the words effective transference over in his mind like a coin he'd found and didn't know the value of yet. It felt right as a name. It felt like a name for something he'd always been doing, actually, something that had just been small and unconscious and turned inward until this morning when the accumulated pressure of 1,000 small cruelties and one enormous loss had turned it outward instead. He could feel it still, distantly, like an ember. Not hot. Just present. He went into the living room. Dudley was still on the sofa. Vernon had taken the armchair with his newspaper, which he wasn't reading, Harry could tell because his eyes weren't moving. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the two of them, and thought about all the evenings he had not been part of this room, all the evenings that had gone on behind this door without any space in them for him. "There's someone coming from the order," he said. "The people who keep watch on this house. They'll want to check everything's all right." Vernon didn't look up from his newspaper. "They're going to ask me if I'm all right," Harry said. "I'm planning to tell them the truth." A pause. "Fine," Vernon said. The word had the quality of a door not exactly closing, but releasing its latch. Something in the hinge giving way. Harry went back upstairs. He sat on the edge of his bed. He picked up a quill and a piece of parchment and he started writing, not to Ron, not to Hermione, not to anyone in particular. Just writing, the way he sometimes did when there was too much in his head for just thinking to organize. He wrote about the morning. He wrote about Castlereagh and effective transference and the way the ministry letter had said extraordinary magical events with that particular bureaucratic gravity. He wrote about Dudley's face when he'd said since before I can remember and the way something in it had shifted. He wrote about Sirius. Not much. Just, I think if you'd been here this morning you would have laughed. Probably at the wrong moment. I think you would have told me I should have done it years ago, and then been immediately told off by Hermione for saying so, and then told me anyway, more quietly, over drinks you weren't supposed to be having. He stopped writing. I miss you in a way I can't finish sentences about yet. I'm working on it. He folded the parchment and put it in the same drawer as Dumbledore's letter and didn't send it anywhere, because there was nowhere to send it. Outside the window, the late afternoon was going gold and long-shadowed, the particular quality of summer light that happened around 5 o'clock and always felt like permission for something, without specifying what. Hedwig nipped his finger gently, not hard, just enough to say I'm here. I notice you, you're not alone in the particular language of owls who have been paying attention. I know, Harry told her. Thanks. She ruffled her feathers and looked away with enormous dignity. He was still sitting there, watching the afternoon happen through the window, when he heard the knock at the front door downstairs, sharp, 3 times, unmistakably not a Muggle knock. He heard Petunia's footsteps crossing the hall. Heard the door open. Heard a voice he recognized. Tonks. He could always tell Tonks, there was a quality to her presence, a kind of brightness in her voice even when she was trying to be official, that was distinctive as a signature. Evening. Harry in. He's upstairs, Petunia said. A pause, surprise at the civil answer, probably. Right. Cheers. Footsteps on the stairs, quick and uneven in the slightly rolling way Tonks had that always made it sound like she was moments away from falling over something, 2 sharp raps on his door. It's open, Harry called. She came in with her hair bubblegum pink and her expression somewhere between professional concern and barely suppressed personal curiosity. She looked him over with a look that had no performance in it, just genuine, direct assessment. You all right? She said. Yes, Harry said. She looked around the room. Looked at Hedwig. Looked back at Harry. Castlereagh filed her report. I was on duty when it came through. She leaned against the doorframe. Effective transference. I had to look it up. She paused. 17 cases in 400 years, Harry. I know. That's extraordinary. Apparently. She studied him. You don't seem particularly surprised by yourself. I'm mostly just tired, Harry said honestly. I think being surprised comes later. Right now I'm in the bit where everything's happened and you're waiting for it to mean something. Tonks was quiet for a moment. Then she came the rest of the way into the room, sat down on the floor with her back against the wardrobe, not the chair, the floor, because Tonks always found the least conventional place to occupy in a room, and said, "Tell me about it." The actual magic. What did it feel like? No preamble. No standard order protocol about checking the house and filing her incident report first. Just, tell me. And Harry, surprised by the simplicity of it, told her. He told her about the pressure in his chest and the tide moving sideways and the way it had felt not like a spell but like a fact. He told her about Castlereagh's instruments and the way his uncle had sat down like his strings had been cut. He told her about Petunia on the kitchen floor. He told her about Dudley asking how long and the particular expression on his cousin's face that Harry still couldn't fully name. Tonks listened without interrupting. When he was done she was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. "How much did you give them?" she asked. "Scale of, I don't know. All of it to none of it." "Enough," Harry said. "Not all. I don't think all of it would have been, I don't think they could have survived all of it." "No," Tonks said, and her voice was very careful on that syllable. "No, I don't think they could." Something about the way she said it. Certain and direct, not dramatized. Just, "This is true, we both know this is true, I will not pretend otherwise." Harry looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "For that." She looked back. Shrugged, the way people shrugged when they felt something fully but didn't want to make a thing of it. "Yep." Downstairs, the television came on. Vernon was watching something. The ordinary sounds of the house reasserting themselves around the extraordinary thing that had happened in it. Harry could hear Petunia in the kitchen again, the quiet rhythm of her preparing dinner, the sounds of someone who organized their feelings through the physical management of objects and space. "Dumbledore's going to want to see you," Tonks said. "He's been notified. I'd give it until morning before he shows up." "I know," Harry said. "I got his letter." "Did you read it?" "No." She tilted her head. "No. Not yet," Harry said. "I'll get to it." She looked at him with a new kind of assessment, not worried exactly. More like the look of someone recalibrating. Like she'd come in expecting something and was finding something adjacent but different, and deciding she preferred the thing she'd found. "Okay," Tonks said. "That's okay." Outside, the gold afternoon had deepened into the first blue edge of evening. Number 4 Privet Drive sat in its row of identical neighbors and looked like nothing had happened in it, which was what it had always looked like and which had always, in Harry's experience, been the most effective lie a house could tell. He sat on the edge of his bed in the company of an order member who had decided to sit on his floor instead of taking the chair, and the owl who had decided his well-being was personally her business, and the quiet aftermath of a morning that had changed the shape of something, he didn't know what yet, didn't know how much, didn't know what the shape would look like when the settling was finished. But he knew this, he was not sorry. Not even close. And for the first time since the veil, he was looking forward. Chapter 2, the morning after Dumbledore came at 7 in the morning. Harry knew it was him before he reached the window. There was a quality to the magical presence of very powerful wizards that registered somewhere below conscious thought, a kind of atmospheric shift, like the way a room changed when someone with real authority walked into it. Harry had felt it around Dumbledore his whole time at Hogwarts without ever having a name for it. He had a name for it now, he was simply more aware of things than he used to be. The morning had done that. Scraped something clean. He was already dressed when he heard the knock at the front door. Sitting at his desk with Hedwig on his shoulder and the unopened Hogwarts letter in front of him, which he'd retrieved from the drawer an hour ago and had been looking at with the focused avoidance of someone who knew that opening a thing made it real. He opened it now. "Harry, I understand something significant occurred this morning. I would very much like to speak with you at your earliest convenience, which, given the circumstances, I suspect means tomorrow morning, if you'll permit me to come to you rather than requiring your travel. I want to say first, before anything else, I am sorry. Not for what happened this morning, I think you know I mean something larger than that, and I think you also know it is long overdue. I will explain more when I see you. There is a great deal I should have explained much earlier. Yours, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. The apology was real, he could tell that, even through parchment. Dumbledore's prose always had a quality of careful intention, every word placed rather than written, and I am sorry sitting in the middle of that letter had the weight of something that had cost him. That mattered. It didn't resolve anything, but it mattered. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Downstairs, Petunia opened the front door. Harry came downstairs to find his headmaster standing in the hallway of number 4 Privet Drive looking, as he always did in Muggle settings, both completely out of place and entirely unconcerned about it. His robes today were deep burgundy with silver embroidery at the cuffs. His half-moon spectacles were perched on the bridge of his nose and his white beard was neatly arranged and he was holding a small paper bag that turned out, when Harry reached the bottom of the stairs and could see it properly, to be from a bakery 2 streets over. "Good morning, Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm and direct and slightly careful in the way it got when he was managing something. "I brought lemon pastries. I hope that's all right." Harry looked at him. "You walked to the bakery?" "It seemed the appropriate way to arrive," Dumbledore said simply. "Less dramatic than other options. More respectful of the morning." Petunia was standing slightly behind the door with the expression of someone who had been raised to offer tea to guests and was currently at war with approximately 15 different feelings about whether this particular guest qualified. She said, stiffly, "The kitchen's through there." "Thank you, Miss Dursley," Dumbledore said. And then he looked at her, really looked, the way he sometimes looked at people, with a direct and total attention that had nothing evaluating in it, just seeing, and said, "I hope you are well." Petunia made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not. "I'll put the kettle on," she said, and went to the kitchen. Harry led Dumbledore through to the kitchen table, the same chairs, the morning light coming through the same window, and they sat down across from each other, and Petunia moved around the edges of the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had decided to be extremely busy with the tea. Dumbledore set the pastries between them and folded his hands on the table and looked at Harry with those steady, perceptive eyes. Harry looked back. "You read my letter," Dumbledore said. "This morning." "I didn't read it last night." "No. I thought you might not." A pause. Not awkward, Dumbledore managed silence with the same precision he managed speech, and this one meant, "I'm not going to pretend that's not significant." "How are you feeling?" "Better than I have in 5 weeks, Harry said honestly. Dumbledore received that without changing his expression, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. He picked up the paper bag and opened it and slid a pastry onto the table in front of Harry with the domestic quietness of someone who knew that difficult conversations went better when hands had something to do. Harry took a bite. It was very good. Flaky and sharp with lemon curd. "Mafalda's report was thorough," Dumbledore said. "She is a good administrator, Castlereagh. Thorough and discreet." He paused. "Effective transference. I have read about it, over the years. I did not expect to encounter it in my lifetime. Apparently it's rare. Extraordinarily so." He was quiet for a moment. "May I ask, and you need not answer, whether you knew, before yesterday, that you had this ability?" "No," Harry said. "But when she described it, the way it works, the passive form, people understanding you, I think I've had it for a long time without knowing what it was." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "That would be consistent with how these abilities manifest. Gradually, then suddenly." He looked at his hands. "Harry. There are things I should tell you, things I should have told you last year, and did not, out of a combination of genuine concern for you and, if I am being fully honest, a tendency toward excessive management of information that I have not always applied as wisely as I believed. Harry said nothing. He had a sense that the correct thing here was to let Dumbledore arrive at the point himself, without being hurried. I placed you with the Dursleys, Dumbledore said, because the blood protection your mother's sacrifice created required you to live with her family. That is true and it remains true. But. He paused. I also knew, in placing you there, that it was not an ideal situation. I had reports. Over the years. From the Order members who watched the house. Nothing that constituted, by the standards we then applied, formal documentation of harm. But enough that a man paying proper attention should have done more than he did. Harry was looking at him steadily. A man paying proper attention, Harry said, would have noticed that I showed up to Hogwarts not knowing I was famous, not knowing what magic was, not knowing that my parents were considered heroes. A man paying proper attention would have wondered how a child raised in a warm and loving home could arrive at 11 years old so systematically unaware of his own value. Dumbledore met his eyes. Did not look away. Yes, he said. You are right. You have been managing me, Harry said. Since I was 11. Deciding what I needed to know, when I needed to know it, how much information I could handle. Treating me like a resource to be carefully maintained rather than a person who deserved to understand his own life. Yes, Dumbledore said again. Each time quieter than the last, as though the agreements were costing him something. Sirius died, Harry said, because I was kept so carefully ignorant that Voldemort was able to use it against me. Because I didn't know enough, and I wasn't trusted enough, and the people who should have made sure I had what I needed to protect myself had decided that protecting me meant keeping me small. Petunia had gone completely still at the counter. The kettle was boiling. She didn't move to take it off. That is, Dumbledore stopped. Started again. That is a fair characterization. I'm not trying to be fair, Harry said. I'm trying to be accurate. Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted. It was subtle, a slight loosening around the eyes, a quality of attention that went from careful to something more genuine, as though the precision he usually managed himself with had given way to something less rehearsed. You are angry with me, Dumbledore said. I am, Harry said. I've been angry with you for most of 5th year and I managed it by telling myself you had reasons I didn't understand yet. Maybe you did. But having reasons doesn't mean the outcome was acceptable, and I think I'm done pretending it was. The kettle clicked off. Petunia poured the water with her back to them and her shoulders very straight. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, would you show me? Harry went still. Show you? What you showed them. He didn't gesture toward Vernon and Petunia. He didn't need to. Not all of it, I understand that is not how it works, in any case. But, something. I am asking to understand, not asking for absolution. Those are very different things and I want to be clear about which I mean. Harry looked at him. At this man, this brilliant, complicated, genuinely well-intentioned man who had made catastrophic decisions with Harry's life out of a conviction that he knew best, and he thought, is this what he deserves, or is this what he's asking for because he thinks he deserves it? And then he thought, those are the same thing, actually. It won't be like it was this morning, Harry said. I don't fully control it yet. This morning it was reactive. Right now it's quieter. Whatever you can manage, Dumbledore said. Harry put his hand, palm flat, on the table between them. He didn't touch Dumbledore, he had an instinct, not fully formed, that physical contact wasn't necessary for this. That what he was working with operated more like intention than touch. He thought about the cupboard. Not as a fact, not as a memory to be described, he felt it. The actual physical dimensions of it, the exact quality of the dark, the way sound traveled through the door from the rest of the house, the way belonging to a world that was happening without you felt at 4 years old when you had no reference for anything different. He felt it and he let it move. It was much smaller this morning than the night before, not a tide, just a current. A single thread of truth passing between them at the table in the ordinary morning kitchen with the lemon pastries and the cooling tea. Dumbledore's hands, folded on the table, went rigid for exactly 3 seconds. Then they relaxed. And the old man's eyes, behind their spectacles, were very bright. He didn't say anything for a while. Harry ate the rest of his pastry and waited. "I have spent many years," Dumbledore said at last, "telling myself that discomfort is not harm. That deprivation of warmth is different from active cruelty. That what you experienced here was difficult, but not." He stopped. "I see that was wrong. Discomfort is not harm," Harry agreed. "What I experienced here wasn't discomfort." "No," Dumbledore said. "It was not." Another silence. This one had a different quality, settled, rather than tense. The silence of two people who have said the real thing and are letting it exist between them without rushing to paper over it. Then Dumbledore said, "I would like to tell you what I know about your ability. What I know from study. I have read everything available on effective transference in the last decade, which is sparse but illuminating. And I would like to begin treating you as the person you actually are rather than the person I have been trying to keep safe by keeping small." A pause. "If you are willing to let me try." Harry looked at him. "I'm willing to see." "That is a fair response," Dumbledore said, and something in his expression, very briefly, looked relieved. Vernon appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing his Saturday clothes again, because it was the weekend, and he had the look of a man who had rehearsed something and was now standing at the moment of delivery with considerably less certainty than he'd had during the rehearsal. He looked at Dumbledore, the robes, the beard, the sheer Dumbledore-ness of him, and something in his face did the familiar preparation for aggression that Harry had watched it do his whole life. But it stopped. Stopped at the point where it would normally have committed to something, and instead just stayed where it was, uncertain. Dumbledore turned in his chair and looked at Vernon with that same total, non-evaluative attention he'd given Petunia. "Mr. Dursley," he said. "I am Albus Dumbledore. I believe we've met briefly, some years ago." "I remember," Vernon said. His voice had none of its usual self-importance. He sounded, Harry thought, like a man trying to stand normally after an injury. "I owe you an explanation," Dumbledore said. "About what happened to your family this morning. Not an excuse, an explanation. Would you sit down?" Vernon looked at the chair. Looked at Harry. Harry looked back, steady, giving nothing particular. Vernon sat down. "Your nephew," Dumbledore said, "has an innate magical ability that manifested yesterday under significant emotional stress. He did not plan it, could not have prevented it, and from what I understand of its nature, what he allowed you to experience was nothing more or less than the truth." He paused. "I will not apologize for what you felt. But I want you to understand its source." Vernon was looking at the table. "What's going to happen?" he said. "To us. Our memory, or nothing," Dumbledore said simply. "What happened is yours to keep. The Ministry has no interest in removing it. I have no interest in removing it." He glanced briefly at Harry. "It seems to me that some knowledge should not be taken back." Something in Vernon's chest moved. Harry watched it happen, the visible physical evidence of a man whose body was processing something that hadn't reached his mind yet. His jaw tightened. His hands on the table were very still. "He was a child," Vernon said. "Not to Harry. Not to Dumbledore. To the table." Harry said nothing. When I, Vernon stopped. The sentence didn't seem to have anywhere to go. He tried again. "He was a child and yes," Harry said. Vernon looked up at him then. And it was the first time, the absolute first time in Harry's memory, that his uncle looked at him without any of the component parts of dismissal or condescension or aggrieved displacement. He looked at Harry the way you looked at something when you had just understood, for the first time, what it actually was. It didn't fix anything. Harry felt no sudden softening, no desire to offer the easy comfort of "it's all right, it's fine, water under the bridge." Those words would have been a lie, and this morning, in this kitchen, lies felt physically impossible. But something passed between them, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just acknowledgement, and that was more real than any of the alternatives. "The ministry cleared things," Harry said. "Yesterday. I'm not in trouble." "Good," Vernon said. The word came out raw. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and left the kitchen. His footsteps went heavily up the stairs. A door closed quietly, not slammed, just closed, and then the house was quiet again. Petunia set 3 cups of tea on the table. She stood for a moment at the edge of the table, looking at the middle distance, and then she said, "Lily used to do something like that." Both Harry and Dumbledore went very still. Not what he did yesterday," Petunia said, to the air, to the cup of tea she was holding. "But she had something. When she felt something strongly enough you could feel it too. Standing next to her. Like standing near a fire." A pause. "I thought it was just her. I always thought it was just her." Harry looked at his aunt. At this thin, careful, held-in woman who had spent 40 years organizing her feelings into categories she could manage, and who had this morning been stripped of every category she'd ever used to avoid the one she'd been hiding from. "She had it too?" he asked. Petunia finally looked at him. "Not as strong. And she stopped. She never used it the way you did. She didn't know she was doing it, I think." A long pause. "She would have hated that it hurt you. Both of them, she would have," her voice gave at the end of the sentence. She set her tea down carefully and left the room. Harry stared at the table. Dumbledore said nothing. He was very good at nothing, when nothing was called for. After a minute, Harry picked up his tea. It was the right temperature. Petunia, despite everything, made excellent tea, always had. It was one of those small stubborn competencies that persisted regardless of feeling. "She knew my mother had it," Harry said. "She was aware of your mother's gifts, yes," Dumbledore said. "More aware than she ever let on, I suspect." He paused. "The ability would make sense as an inheritance. Your mother's emotional intelligence was exceptional, it expressed itself differently, more interpersonally, but the root was the same." He looked at Harry. "You come by it honestly. What else do you know about it?" Harry asked. "The ability. What it can do." Dumbledore settled back in his chair with the slight change in bearing that meant he was shifting from managing a difficult conversation to doing something he genuinely enjoyed, which was knowing things. The historical accounts are fragmentary but consistent in several respects. Effective transference operates through intentional emotional memory, the caster's own experience becomes transferable. In passive form, it creates unusual clarity of communication. In active form, it projects a selected experience directly to the target's emotional cognition, they feel it as though it happened to them. He paused. The more complete the caster's emotional understanding of their own experience, the more precise the transference. It cannot project what the caster has not fully felt themselves. So the more I've processed my own history, the more accurately you can share it, yes. Dumbledore looked at him. It is, in a sense, the most honest magic I know of. It cannot be faked. It cannot carry a lie. Harry thought about that. What about in reverse? Can it receive as well as project? Dumbledore's eyebrows moved. That is a very interesting question. The records suggest the ability is primarily projective, but 2 of the 17 documented cases showed evidence of enhanced empathic reception, an unusual sensitivity to the emotional states of others. The ability is bidirectional in the deeper sense, you project your experience, but you are also more permeable to others' experience than a normal witch or wizard. Which is why the DA worked the way it did, Harry said, almost to himself. I believe so, yes. Dumbledore was watching him. You have been an unusually effective teacher, Harry, for reasons beyond technique. People learn from you because they feel that you understand what they don't know yet. That is the ability at work. Harry filed that away. And in combat? I imagine, Dumbledore said carefully, that projecting emotional truth at a target who has spent their life suppressing emotional truth would be considerable. He paused. But I want to be cautious here. This is not a weapon in the way a spell is a weapon. It is intimate and costly in a way spells are not. Using it offensively is using your own pain as ammunition. That has consequences. I know, Harry said. I felt it yesterday. Afterward. The hollowness, Dumbledore said. Yes. It passes. But you will need to be thoughtful about what you draw from and when. He set down his tea. There are other aspects to develop, aspects that don't require drawing from suffering. The ability can carry joy, connection, comfort. The historical accounts suggest those are harder to project but cleaner in their aftermath. A slight pause. I think that is where training should begin. Not with the capacity for pain, but with the full range. When does training start? I thought you might ask that. Dumbledore allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps not on Privet Drive. The morning had gotten properly underway while they'd been talking, the street outside was animated with the sounds of a summer Saturday, and the house had resumed its usual rhythms around them. Somewhere upstairs Dudley was moving around. Vernon had not come back down. Harry finished his tea. I'll be leaving in a week, he said. Going to the Burrow. I know, Dumbledore said. We'll arrange regular sessions, you needn't come to me. I'll come to you. Wherever you are. He stood, straightening his robes with the small, habitual gesture he always made when preparing to leave. Harry. What you did yesterday, to your aunt and uncle. I want to say one thing about it. Harry looked up at him. It was not a crime, Dumbledore said. Not legally, not morally. Not in any framework I'm willing to apply. You have spent 16 years absorbing something that should never have been given to you, and yesterday you declined to absorb it alone. That is not something you should feel any guilt about. Harry said nothing for a moment. Then, I don't. Good, Dumbledore said. And something in the word, in the simple directness of it, the absence of caveat or qualification, landed differently than Harry expected. Like a door being opened from both sides. He walked Dumbledore to the front door. On the threshold, Dumbledore turned back one more time, and this time his expression had something different in it, something underneath the usual careful warmth. Something that Harry recognized, belatedly, as the expression of a man who had been afraid for a very long time that he had done irreparable damage, and was only now beginning to find out that damage and finality were not the same thing. Your mother would be proud of you, Dumbledore said. Not for what happened yesterday. For the clarity you brought to it. Harry stood in the doorway and watched the headmaster of Hogwarts walk down the path of number 4 Privet Drive in his burgundy robes on a Saturday morning and turn left toward the bakery, and he thought about Lily Potter standing next to fire, and felt the thing in his chest that had always been there, the borrowed warmth of someone who had loved him completely and was gone, glow briefly, cleanly, certain. He went back inside. Tonks was in the kitchen. She had apparently let herself in through the back door, which Harry had not heard, and she was eating a lemon pastry with the absolute unapologetic happiness of someone who had found a pastry and was eating it and felt no complexity about this at all. Her hair was yellow this morning, which meant she was in a good mood. Those are good, she said. Where are they from? Bakery on Magnolia Road. I'm going there later. She looked at him. Dumbledore gone. Just now. How did that go? Harry pulled out a chair and sat down. Better than I expected. He looked thoughtful when he left, Tonks said. She finished the pastry. Which is different from his usual thoughtful. Usually he looks like he's 3 steps ahead of everyone. Just now he looked like he was, catching up, Harry said. She pointed at him. Yes. That. Harry looked at the table. He apologized. Did you accept it? I said I was willing to see. He paused. Which is the honest answer? Tonks made a sound of agreement. She had the quality, one of the things Harry had noticed about her last night and again this morning, of someone who didn't perform reactions, who just had them naturally and let them be whatever they were. It was restful in a way he hadn't expected from someone he'd previously only seen in order contexts. Okay, she said. I have things to tell you and they're a bit, you should eat something first. You're eating my pastry. There are 3 more. She slid the bag toward him. He took one. All right. Tell me. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, yellow hair and serious eyes. Words out, she said. About what you did. Not to the general public, it's not in the prophet or anything, they'd have to explain too much about the trace and extraordinary events. But within the order, within the ministry, within the, she hesitated. Within the other side. Harry chewed his pastry. Already? Castlereagh's report went to the head of magical law enforcement, who told 2 people, who each told 2 people, and that's how everything works. She looked at him. Someone in the ministry has a contact who isn't on the right side. We don't know who yet. But as of last night, there are people reporting to Voldemort about a 16-year-old who performed effective transference on Muggles in Surrey. Harry put down his pastry. What's Voldemort's interest? That's the thing, Tonks said. He doesn't have a straightforward interest. It's not, he's not afraid of it, he's not planning to stop you. It's more like, she searched for the word. He's fascinated. Effective transference isn't in any of the standard magical literature he'd have studied. It's not on the registry of known abilities. It operates completely outside the framework of conventional magic in that, she met Harry's eyes. That genuinely interests him in the way something new interests someone who thinks they already know everything. He wants to study it, Harry said. He wants to understand it, Tonks corrected. Which is more dangerous, I think. He's not going to send someone to stop you. He's going to send someone to watch. Harry thought about that. Good. Tonks blinked. Good. If he's watching, Harry said, then he's seeing. And if he's seeing, then eventually there'll be something worth showing him. He said it simply, without drama, the way you stated a plan you'd already decided on. Let him watch. Tonks stared at him for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. Okay, she said. All right. I had you down as, I thought you'd be more what? I don't know. Defensive about it. I'm done being defensive, Harry said. And the simplicity of the statement surprised him slightly, the way it arrived complete, no qualifications attached. I spent 5 years at Hogwarts trying to convince people things were real. Voldemort's back, the ministry's corrupt, Sirius was innocent, the Triwizard Tournament was a trap. I kept being right and keeping quiet about it and hoping people would catch up. He picked up his pastry again. I'm done doing that. Tonks was looking at him with that recalibrating expression again, the one she'd had last night when he'd said he hadn't opened Dumbledore's letter yet. You're different to what I expected, she said. From the reports. What were the reports? Grieving. Volatile. Might need to be talked down. Harry almost smiled. I was grieving. Am grieving. But volatile and needing to be talked down, he paused. Who wrote the reports? Moody, mostly. Moody sees threat management first and people second. Always has. He wasn't saying it critically. Just accurately. I don't need to be talked down. I know exactly what I'm doing. Do you? She asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. Not the details, he said. But yes. The direction. She accepted that. Okay. Then here's the last thing I have to tell you. She reached into the pocket of her jacket, She was in Muggle clothes this morning, jeans and a faded blue jacket with something spilled on the left cuff, and produced a folded piece of parchment. This came overnight. Not from the Ministry. Not from the Order. Harry took it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, cramped and angular, the letters leaning as though under pressure. No signature. You have done something that cannot be learned. There are those of us who have been waiting for you to stop performing smallness. Do not stop what you started yesterday. The game changes when the board changes. Harry read it twice. Who sent this? We don't know, Tonks said. The owl was untraceable. The parchment's not enchanted. Whoever sent it was extremely careful about staying invisible. She watched him. Ideas? Not yet. He folded the note and put it in his pocket with Dumbledore's letter. 2 pieces of paper that together covered the full range of what yesterday had set in motion, one from the world he knew, asking him to trust it with the truth it had withheld, one from somewhere else entirely, telling him the truth had been noticed. Be careful with that, Tonks said. I will be. I mean it, Harry. I know you do. He looked at her. Are you staying? On watch? Yeah, until Hestia relieves me at 3. She paused. But I was going to go get more pastries. Do you want anything? The absolute normality of the offer, the way she made it without any acknowledgement of the magnitude of the morning around it, just, I'm going to the bakery, do you want anything, hit him somewhere unexpected. He'd spent 5 years watching adults either overreact to his life or fail to react at all. The middle ground, the simple, matter-of-fact acknowledgement that things were real and also people needed to eat, was newer territory than it should have been. Chocolate twist, he said. If they have them. Obviously, Tonks said, and put her jacket on and went out the back door. Harry sat at the kitchen table in the mid-morning quiet and listened to the house around him. Upstairs, Dudley was moving between his room and the bathroom. Somewhere Vernon was being very quiet in the way he'd been since this morning. Petunia was in the garden, he could see her through the window, deadheading roses with a focused deliberateness that meant she was thinking rather than gardening. He watched her for a moment. This thin woman with her careful hands and her 40 years of chosen not knowing, who had this morning told him without meaning to that she had missed her sister for a long time, in ways she'd never let herself name. He thought about Lily Potter standing beside fire. He thought about that warmth in his chest, that borrowed inheritance. He thought, I didn't know her. I have never known her. But I carry something of hers and she left it intentionally, the way she left everything she did, completely, without reservation, for him. He thought, she would have wanted me to use it. He picked up his wand from where he'd left it on the table, he'd been carrying it constantly since 5th year, tucked in his pocket or on the table within reach, a habit that had become structural, and he held it loosely in his hand, not pointing it anywhere, just held it, and he tried something he hadn't tried before. Not the outward tide. Not the projection of pain. Something smaller and cleaner. He thought about Sirius. Not the veil, not the fall. He thought about the first night in 3rd year when he'd learned who Sirius was, who he actually was, not the newspaper version, and the starburst feeling of that. The sudden knowledge that there was a person in the world who was specifically and entirely on his side. The way that knowledge had felt, warm, specific, absolutely real. He felt it. Let himself feel it completely, without the reflexive dampening he usually applied to things that hurt now because they were gone. The kitchen light shifted. Just slightly, a warmth in it, like afternoon settling in early. The pastries on the table smelled more strongly for a moment. Something in the room itself felt, briefly, less like a kitchen that had been argued in and more like a kitchen that had been sat in comfortably by people who meant each other well. Harry exhaled. The light went back to normal. The room went back to itself. But something had happened. A small proof of concept, not pain, but warmth. Not loss, but the true thing the loss was evidence of. He'd projected it outward, briefly, without meaning to, ambient rather than directed, just filling the room with it the way a fire filled a room. He heard a footstep in the doorway. Dudley was standing there in joggers and a worn-out t-shirt, hair still flat from sleep, holding an empty cereal bowl with the slightly bewildered expression of someone who had come to get breakfast and found something unexpected. He looked at Harry. He looked around the kitchen with the slight confusion of someone responding to something they can't identify. He looked back at Harry. "Did you just do something?" Dudley asked. "Sort of," Harry said. Dudley came into the kitchen and put his bowl in the sink. He stood with his back to Harry for a moment, looking at the garden where Petunia was still among the roses. "What was that feeling?" he said. "I was thinking about someone I lost," Harry said. "The feeling of having them." Dudley was quiet. He stopped. Started again. "That feels nothing like what you did yesterday." "No," Harry said. "It's not the same thing." Dudley turned around and leaned against the counter. He was big, had always been big, overfed and broad, their whole childhood a study in contrasts, and he looked slightly ridiculous in his joggers, and he was looking at Harry with more directness than he usually managed. "I've been thinking," Dudley said. About what you showed us yesterday. Or made us feel, whatever." Harry waited. "I don't remember deciding," Dudley said. "To treat you like that. When we were kids. I don't remember thinking, I'm going to be terrible to Harry. It was what we did. It was what Dad did and Mum went along with and he gestured with his empty cereal bowl. I just copied it. Like it was normal. Because it was. In this house." "I know," Harry said. "That doesn't make it, I know," Harry said again. Dudley looked at him. "You're not going to let me apologize, are you?" "You can apologize," Harry said. "I'm not stopping you. I just don't want you to feel like it resolves something if it doesn't." "Does it not?" Harry thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet." Dudley considered that. "Fair," he said finally, in the same tone he'd used yesterday, which was apparently becoming their language, blunt and minimal and meaning more than it looked like. He poured himself cereal, and sat at the table, and they didn't talk for a while, and the kitchen held both of them in a not unfriendly quiet that was entirely new, without either of them mentioning the fact. Which was, Harry supposed, a start. Tonks came back at noon with 6 pastries and the information that 2 strangers had been standing on the corner of Privet Drive for the last 20 minutes, not doing anything, not being obvious, just standing there in the way that only people under very specific instructions stood. "Death Eaters?" Harry asked. "Not in uniform," she said. "Could be. Could be curious neutrals. There are people in the wizarding world who aren't affiliated either way but pay attention to developments." She put the pastry bag on the table. "Your chocolate twist." He took it. "Are they going to do anything? Right now?" "No. They're watching." She sat down. "Like I said." Harry looked out the kitchen window at the perfectly ordinary street beyond the garden wall. Nothing visible. Just Surrey, being Surrey, having no opinion about any of it. "Then let them watch," he said. He took a bite of the chocolate twist and thought about Voldemort in whatever dark place he currently occupied, receiving a report about what had happened in this kitchen, turning it over with the terrible focused intelligence that had made him the most dangerous wizard of the century. Effective transference, Harry thought. 17 cases in 4 centuries. The most honest magic in the world. You cannot project what you have not fully felt yourself. He had 16 years of material. He was only just getting started. The afternoon settled over Privet Drive like the lid on a box, warm and still and holding everything in place temporarily before the world started moving again. The watchers on the corner stood there until 3 and then were gone, which was either reassuring or not, depending on what their instructions had been and whether absence was better than presence. Harry spent the afternoon sitting on the shed roof. This time nobody asked him to get down. Chapter 3, What the world runs on the burrow smelled like wood smoke and rising bread and the particular organized chaos of a house that had been built in stages by a family that loved each other too much to ever agree on where to put anything. Harry stepped out of the fireplace on a Tuesday morning in the second week of July and immediately got hit in the face by a flying oven mitt. "Sorry." Ginny's voice from somewhere above him. That was for Fred. "Oi." Fred appeared at the top of the stairs, looked at Harry, looked at the oven mitt on the floor, and said with perfect composure, "Welcome back, mate." "Thanks," Harry said, and brushed soot off his shoulder. Mrs. Weasley descended on him before he'd fully orientated himself, both arms around him, flour on her apron, the smell of her which was the smell of the burrow which was the smell of being genuinely, specifically wanted, and held on with the fierce practicality of a woman who expressed love through grip. "You look thin," she said into his hair. "I'm fine." "You look thin and I'm making lunch." She released him and held him at arm's length and examined him with the particular maternal survey that took inventory of a person's entire condition in 4 seconds and immediately began planning corrections. Whatever she saw made her jaw tighten briefly and her eyes go soft and then settle back into purposeful. "Ron's in the garden," she said. "Go on. Lunch in an hour." Harry picked up his bag and went. The garden of the burrow was its own ecosystem, gnome-infested and magnificently overgrown in the way of places where the people living in them are too busy being alive to worry much about tidiness. Ron was sitting on the low wall at the back with 2 bottles of butterbeer, which meant he'd been watching for the flu and had prepared. He handed Harry one without ceremony. "All right," he said. "All right," Harry said, and sat beside him. They drank for a moment. The garden was full of the sounds of summer, insects, wine through the unmanaged hedge, something that was either a gnome or George making a suspicious noise in the far corner. "Mum's been mental about feeding you," Ron said. "Since word got round." "Word got round." "Dad told her the basics." "Not everything, he doesn't know everything. But enough." Ron turned his bottle in his hands. "Harry." "I know." "No, I mean," Ron looked at him. He had the expression he got when he was working towards something difficult, the honest but uncomfortable face that meant he was going to say the real thing rather than the comfortable thing. "I didn't know. About the Dursleys. Not properly. I knew they were awful, you said so, but I always thought I thought it was like, you know, annoying relatives." "Not," he gestured. "Not that." Harry looked out at the garden. A gnome emerged from behind the compost heap, registered Harry's presence, screamed a small gnome profanity, and retreated. "It wasn't something I talked about," Harry said. "I know. But I should have asked more." A pause. "I'm asking now, if it's all right, Ron." "I don't want it to be all right in the way where you're just done with it." Ron looked at him. "I want it to be actually all right." Harry thought about that. The distinction was real and Ron had found it, which was, sometimes Ron surprised him, found the exact true edge of a thing that other people went around. "I think it's getting there," Harry said honestly. The magic helped. Which is strange to say. But it did. Making them feel it. "Yes." Ron nodded slowly. "Good," he said, with a flatness that meant he was containing a stronger reaction than that, but had decided that this particular conversation didn't need his anger in it. His anger on Harry's behalf would come later, probably loudly, probably to Hermione or in private. He was managing it. "Hermione's here Thursday," he added. "I know. She wrote. She's read everything there is on effective transference, obviously. She had 3 books delivered the day after it happened." Harry almost smiled. "Obviously. She wants to understand it. She's not being weird about it, she's just, Hermione." "Yeah." Ron finished his butterbeer. "She did say something, actually. She said," he stopped. "What?" "She said she thinks she's felt it before. Coming from you." "In the DA," but before that too. She said she never knew what to call it, but there were moments when you were explaining something, or scared, and she could. He turned the empty bottle. She said she could just feel it. What you were feeling. And she thought it was just her being, you know. Reading you well. But now she thinks it wasn't just that. Harry was quiet. He had known this, in the abstract. Castlereagh had said it, Dumbledore had said it. But hearing it from Ron about Hermione, in the garden of the burrow with the gnomes and the summer sounds, it landed differently. More real in the way that things became real when the people they were about were people you loved. How long do you think, he started. Mate, Ron said, if I had to guess, I'd say since first year. That thing in the chess room, where you kept, where we all knew you were going to go on and we didn't want you to, but we also knew it was right. That feeling. He looked at Harry. That might have been you. Harry stared at the garden for a long time. 17 cases in 4 centuries. He'd been walking around with it his whole life, turned inward, turned quiet, leaking warmth and truth into rooms without knowing he was doing it, making people understand him more completely than he was ever managing to articulate. Every person who had trusted him faster than made sense. Every room that had gone still when he spoke. The gnome appeared again, assessed the situation, and retreated again. Right, Harry said. Yeah, Ron said. They sat in the afternoon sun and let that be enough, and it was. Hermione arrived on Thursday with 2 bags, 7 books, and the contained, kinetic energy of someone who had been sitting with a great deal of information for several days and was finally within range of the person she needed to discuss it with. She walked through the burrow's back door, spotted Harry at the kitchen table, pointed at him, and said, I have questions. Hello to you too, Harry said. She hugged him properly, fierce and quick, the way she hugged when she was feeling too much to be graceful about it, and then pulled back and looked at him with the full-beam assessment she usually reserved for textbooks that weren't being forthcoming. You look better, she said. Then your letters. My letters were from early July. They were also from someone who wasn't sleeping. She sat down across from him. Are you sleeping now? Better. The magic? Possibly. Or just, being here. She looked around the kitchen, the clock with all its Weasley hands, the stacked dishes, the smell of Mrs. Weasley's cooking, and her expression softened for a moment. Yes, she said. I understand that. Ron appeared with 3 mugs of tea. He set them down with the precision of someone who had learned that providing beverages was the fastest way to make certain conversations happen at a manageable speed. Right, said Hermione, and put a book on the table. Tell me everything. He did. He told her about the kitchen and the broken glass and the tide moving sideways. He told her about Castlereagh. He told her about Dumbledore's visit and what he'd shown him, and about Petunia saying Lily used to do something like that. He told her about what he'd done in the empty kitchen with the borrowed memory of Sirius, the warmth, the light shifting, Dudley standing in the doorway with his cereal bowl. Hermione listened with the intensity of someone conducting a very important experiment. She took notes, which Harry had expected. She asked 3 sharp questions, all of which were better than the questions Castlereagh had asked, which Harry had not expected. Ron watched from his end of the table with the satisfaction of someone watching 2 people he admired operate at full capacity. The range, Hermione said. When you projected the warmth in the kitchen, was it limited to the room, or could you feel it extending beyond that? Harry thought. The room, I think. Maybe the hallway. It didn't feel like it went further than that. And when you were in the kitchen with the Dursleys, the first time, the full transference, that felt like it could have gone anywhere, Harry said honestly. I wasn't controlling it. It just, moved. Because it was reactive, Hermione said. Uncontrolled. The smaller projection, the warmth, was intentional, so it had intentional limits. She tapped her quill on her notes. That's consistent with what the books say about intentional versus reactive magic generally. The reactive burst always has more raw power because it's not filtered by conscious limitation. She paused. Harry, the reason your first projection was so complete isn't just because you had a lot to draw from. It's because there was nothing between you and it. No filters. You were fully feeling it when it moved. I know, he said. Which means the ability is directly proportional to your own emotional honesty. She met his eyes. The more clearly you understand and feel your own experience, the more precisely you can share it. Dumbledore said that too. Dumbledore is right about some things. She looked at her notes. And in combat, Hermione, Ron said. What? You've been in the house 20 minutes. I'm aware of that, Ron, there are actual biscuits on the counter. She blinked. Looked at the biscuits. Made a visible effort and closed her notebook. Fine. Biscuits first. Thank you, said Ron. They ate Mrs. Weasley's biscuits, thick and warm, the kind with raisins and something spiced, and talked about ordinary things for an hour, which was its own kind of restoration. Fred and George appeared briefly to attempt to convince Harry to test a new product before Hermione fixed them with a look that redirected them almost physically out of the kitchen. Ginny came in from Quidditch practice with grass in her hair and a grin that she aimed more or less at everyone equally and which Harry received without examining why it arrived with a slight additional warmth. It was a good afternoon. Genuinely, uncomplicated good. Harry hadn't had many of those. They went to Diagon Alley on Saturday. The plan was simple: school supplies, Flourish and Blots, Ollivanders to have Harry's wand looked at because Dumbledore had suggested it after learning about the morning with the Dursleys, and then Fortescue's for ice cream. A normal August errand day. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny, with Mr. Weasley nominally supervising and spending most of his time looking at Muggle objects in shop windows with the attention of an academic in a primary source. The alley was its usual late summer state, crowded with returning students, loud with the overlap of a dozen conversations, the smell of broomstick polish and old books and something cooking from the magical menagerie end. Harry had his hood up, which was not because he was trying to hide, he'd given up on hiding as a general strategy, but because the scar attracted a specific quality of attention that was exhausting to manage on a shopping day. He was in Flourish and Blots with Hermione, examining the defense section with the slightly dejected pragmatism of someone who'd had 5 consecutive years of inadequate defense instruction, when he felt it. Not the effective transference, something else. The receptive side of it, the enhanced sensitivity that Dumbledore had mentioned. A quality of wrongness moving through the ambient emotional air of the bookshop the way a cold current moved through warm water, localized, directional, intentional. He looked up. Hermione was 2 shelves away, pulling down advanced magical theory with the focused satisfaction of someone being reunited with a category of object they loved. Ron was at the front of the shop looking at Quidditch Monthly. Mr. Weasley was in the Muggle Studies section, which was its own kind of irony. Harry put down the book he was holding and moved casually toward the door. He felt it more strongly as he moved, not aimed at him, not yet, but near and getting nearer, the feeling of someone with an intention they were containing carefully. He reached the door of the shop and looked out at the alley. Nothing obvious. The usual crowd. A witch arguing with a goblin outside Gringotts. 2 students from what looked like Hufflepuff comparing robes. A tall man in a grey cloak standing very still near the entrance to Nocturne Alley, looking at nothing. Looking at nothing too deliberately. Harry had been looked at enough to know when someone was working to not look at him. He stepped out of the shop. Felt Hermione notice his absence, he could feel her attention shifting toward the door, the specific quality of her awareness when she registered something unexpected. He didn't turn back. The man in the grey cloak was 40 feet away and hadn't moved. Harry walked toward him with the direct unhurried pace of someone who has decided that the shortest distance between 2 points is the most useful one. 10 feet away, the man's eyes moved to him. Middle-aged, nondescript face, the kind of features that were designed to be forgettable. But the eyes were sharp and calculating and very still, and the right hand, tucked into the cloak, was holding something. Harry looked at him. The feeling coming off this man was cold and organized, not passionate, not angry. Professional. The feeling of someone with a job to do who was very good at their job and felt nothing substantial about it. "You're watching me," Harry said. The man said nothing. "You've been watching since we arrived. Since we left the leaky cauldron, actually, I felt you on the street." Harry kept his voice conversational. They were in the middle of Diagon Alley on a busy Saturday and the crowd moved around them without paying particular attention, which was one of the things about crowds. "What are your instructions?" "Still nothing." "Observe and report," Harry said. "That's what Voldemort told you, isn't it?" The man's face didn't change. But something in him changed, a slight shift in the emotional register, a spiked edge of something that might have been surprise or recalculation. "I'm not going to jinx you," Harry said. "I don't need to." He held the man's eyes. "But I want you to report something specific. Tell him I know he's interested. Tell him I'm not concerned about that. Tell him that what he heard about happened because it was true, and that I'll be using it again, and that the next time I do it won't be at Muggles." He paused. "Have you got all that?" The man looked at him for a long moment. Then looked away. "You should go," Harry said pleasantly. "Before the people coming out of that bookshop notice you." He turned and walked back toward Flourish and Blots. Behind him, he heard footsteps moving away quickly. Hermione was in the doorway with her book under her arm and an expression that had passed through concern and landed on something that was trying hard to be ordinary. "Who was that?" she said quietly. "Voldemort's observer," Harry said, walking past her back into the shop. "I sent a message." She fell into step beside him. "Harry, he was just watching. He wasn't going to do anything." He stopped in front of the defense shelf where he'd been. "I need Practical Combat Magic, Volume 2. Do you see it?" She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone whose instinct is to argue and who has concluded, for now, that the argument would keep. She turned to the shelf. "Top right," she said. "Behind the Lockhart retrospective that I will never understand how it keeps getting reordered into stock." He took the book. "Thank you." They had 10 more minutes in the shop before all hell broke loose outside. It started with a sound, not an explosion exactly, more like the displacement of a large amount of air very suddenly, the way apparition sounded when multiple people did it in close proximity. Then shouting. Then the crack and flash of spellfire. Harry was out the door before the first scream. The alley had gone from its ordinary Saturday bustle to a controlled emergency in the space of about 12 seconds. 3 figures in dark robes at the far end, near the Gringotts steps, 2 more near the entrance. Not trying to get inside anywhere, not pursuing anyone specific. Making a point. The specific theater of it was the point. Harry registered all of this in about 1 second. In the second, he registered that one of the robed figures was directing spells at the crowd rather than at anything structural, which meant they were here for fear rather than damage. The specific cruelty of choosing soft targets. In the 3rd second, his wand was out. He wasn't worried. He recognized this, the calm that arrived in him during actual danger, the way things got sharper rather than louder, the way his mind went clear and efficient while his body moved. He'd had this since first year and he still didn't fully understand it, but it was there and it worked. He sent a protego broad enough to cover the nearest cluster of bystanders, felt the Death Eaters hex hit it and scatter, and moved forward. The Death Eaters had not expected the coverage, they'd expected running, screaming, people diving for cover. They got that from the crowd. They did not get it from Harry, who was walking directly toward them in the middle of the alley like someone who had someplace specific to be. The nearest one sent a blasting curse. Harry sidestepped it and felt the wall of a robe shop disintegrate 2 feet to his right, and thought, not a trained duelist, doesn't adjust his line after the first shot. He kept walking. "Potter," one of them said. The voice was masked by the hood, muffled and strange. "Stand down." "No," Harry said. He was 15 feet away now. Close enough. He hadn't planned it. But the thing in his chest, the ability, the tide, the whatever it was that Castlereagh had named and Dumbledore had studied and his mother had apparently carried at lower intensity, it was there, and it was reading the Death Eater in front of him with the precision of a thing that had always been able to read people but was only now being listened to. What he felt coming off this man was complicated. Layered. Under the professional cold of the trained operative was something that had been under everything for a long time. Something frightened and committed in the way people were committed to things because the alternative was admitting the thing had cost them too much. Loyalty to Voldemort that had calcified from something more complicated, had been, once, about belonging, about having been offered a place when there was nothing else. And now was about the price already paid being too high to question. Harry projected at him. Not pain. Not his own history. Something more specific. He showed him the price. Not Harry's version of it, not the abstract political cost of serving a cause that treated people as expendable. He found the thread of the man's own knowledge of the price, that locked away awareness that the Death Eaters all carried of what they had done and what it had cost them specifically, and he reflected it back. Not magnified. Not altered. Just, returned. The man stopped casting. He stood perfectly still for 3 seconds and then made a sound, not a scream, just a sound, an operat. Gone. Mid-alley, mid-standoff, simply gone. The other 4 Death Eaters looked at each other. Ron appeared at Harry's right shoulder with his wand out. Hermione at his left. Mr. Weasley behind them, and Ginny somewhere to his right flank, which Harry registered as both reassuring and slightly alarming given that she was 15. "What did you do to him?" one of the remaining Death Eaters said. The voice was younger. Uncertain in a way the first voice hadn't been. "I showed him something that belonged to him," Harry said. A pause. "Get out of the alley," Harry said. "There's nothing here for you." The young voice said, "Our instructions were to demonstrate power and collect intelligence," Harry said. He had the reception fully open now, he could feel all 4 of them, their individual emotional signatures like 4 different instruments playing, each with its own quality of fear and commitment and doubt. The youngest one was barely 17. He could feel that, the rawness of it, the insufficient distance from uncertainty that someone seasoned would have built. "You've demonstrated nothing and your intelligence is now, Harry Potter knows you were here and let you leave. Take that back and think about what it means." Another long pause. Then, one by one, with the specific awkwardness of people who had been preparing for violence and were now having to unprepare, the 4 figures disapparated. The alley went quiet. Then it went extremely loud, because Diagon Alley on a Saturday was full of people who had been waiting for the emergency to pass before reacting to it. Harry lowered his wand. Ginny was looking at him with an expression that was, he filed this away for later, for a moment when his brain was doing something other than tactical assessment, not the odd look that people sometimes gave him after things like this, but something more straightforward. More personal. Like she was looking at someone she recognized and finding the recognition satisfying. "You let them go," Ron said. He wasn't criticizing. He was asking. "They weren't the point," Harry said. "The one who left, I projected at him. He'll report that. What he reports is the message." He looked at the space where the Death Eaters had been. "I could have fought them. But fighting them just proves I can fight. What I did proves something Voldemort can't find in any book. That you can reach into people," Hermione said quietly. "Yes." She was doing the thing where she was computing several things at speed and keeping her expression neutral while she did it. "Harry. If he understands the full range of what you can do, and I think he will, quickly, he's going to respond to it. Not with something crude. With something that's specifically designed to counter it." "I know. And countering empathy magic," she stopped. "Start it again. You project your experience. You project truth. The way to counter that is to be someone to whom truth is meaningless. Or someone who has so completely suppressed their own emotional capacity that there's nothing for the transference to. She stopped again. Reach, Harry said. Yes. She looked at him. He's been doing that for 50 years, Harry. Suppressing himself. Pruning away every human response until there's almost nothing, almost, Harry said. She heard it. Heard the weight he put on that single syllable. Her expression shifted. You think there's still something there, she said. I don't think, he said. I know. I've been inside his head before, Hermione. Not by choice, but I have. And there was always, under everything, there was always something. Not love. Not compassion. But fear. The fear of someone who chose power to protect himself from powerlessness so completely that he can't remember what the powerlessness felt like. But it's still there. He looked at her steadily. And I can find it. She held his gaze. That's terrifying, she said. Yes, Harry agreed. For him. Mr. Weasley had already waved over 2 Aurors who'd arrived from the direction of the Ministry. The crowd was reassembling into the cautious, buzzing activity of people who wanted to talk about what they'd seen before they'd fully processed that they'd been afraid. Harry could feel it, the ambient emotional temperature of the alley recovering itself, relief and excitement and the particular buzz of people who had just experienced something and immediately wanted to make it a story. He put his hood down. It took about 4 seconds for someone to notice. The recognition rippled through the nearest part of the crowd the way recognition always did, that sequential awareness, first one person and then the people around them, and the sound level changed. Harry stood in the middle of Diagon Alley with his wand in his hand and his friends at his sides and didn't manage his expression into anything in particular. Didn't arrange himself into the humble, slightly apologetic boy-who-lived presentation he'd been defaulting to since he was 11. He just stood there, himself, and let them look. Okay, Ginny said quietly, beside him. We should move before someone wants a statement. Yeah, Harry said, and they moved. They were halfway to Fortescue's, which was the plan and the plan was still valid as far as Harry was concerned, when he felt someone fall into step behind him. Not threat, he could tell the difference now, the reception giving him a half-second of advance notice that was becoming more reliable every day. He glanced back. A witch he didn't recognize. Late 20s, serious face, short dark hair, wearing robes that were good quality but deliberately understated. She met his eyes without flinching. Mr. Potter, she said. A moment. Who are you? Ron said. My name is Robards, she said. Gawain Robards. I'm the newly appointed head Auror. She looked at Harry with the direct, assessing quality of someone who was genuinely very good at their job. What you just did, the effective transference in a public space against a Death Eater operative, I need to understand exactly what happened before I file my incident report. Harry looked at her. He felt her, steady, professional, genuinely trying to do her job well, and underneath that an honest uncertainty. She had not expected what she'd just seen and she was reorganizing her understanding of the situation with impressive speed. Can we do this at Fortescue's? Harry said. I've been awake since 6 and I want ice cream. Robards blinked. Then, briefly, smiled. Fortescue's is fine, she said. They went to Fortescue's. Harry had raspberry and vanilla. Hermione had something impractically elaborate with 3 different toppings. Ron had a bowl that Fortescue brought out without being asked, which meant either Ron had been here enough recently to have a standing order or Fortescue had very good intuitions about teenage boys in summer. Robards had nothing, which Harry thought said something about how seriously she was taking the situation, and then the situation clearly passed some internal threshold of comfort because she ordered a lemon sorbet and ate it with complete lack of self-consciousness. He told her what he told Castlereagh, the mechanics of it. What he'd done to the Death Eater was trickier to explain because he was still mapping the distinction between the full transference and what he'd done in the alley, which was more targeted, not his own experience but the target's own suppressed self-knowledge, amplified and returned. So you didn't project your own feelings at him, Robart said, very precisely. You found something he already felt and gave it back to him. Yes. It's the same root ability but different in application. Can you do it to anyone? Harry thought. I don't know yet. I think it's harder with people who've been more deliberate about suppression. The Death Eater this afternoon had buried it, but it wasn't gone. It was accessible. He paused. Voldemort is different. She looked at him. You're already thinking about Voldemort. Aren't you? A slight pause. Yes, she admitted. Then we're thinking about the same thing. He ate his ice cream. I don't know if it works the way I think it does on him. I've never, he stopped. That wasn't true, actually. Not exactly. There have been moments, he said carefully. When we've been connected, through the scar. Where I've felt what he's feeling. And it goes both ways. He's felt what I feel. He looked at her. Which means the connection already exists. I just need to understand how to use it deliberately. Robards was quiet for a moment. Mr. Potter, she said. In the interests of full disclosure, the head of magical law enforcement briefed me this morning about your ability and its classification, and also about an unattributed communication you received at Privet Drive. We've been trying to identify the sender. Harry looked up. Any progress? Not much. But the handwriting analysis returned a partial match to a ministry employee who died 7 years ago, which is interesting in the way that things are interesting when they don't make sense. Harry thought about the note. Do not stop what you started yesterday. The game changes when the board changes. A ghost, he said. Not registered, she said. But that's not the only type. She said it with the careful neutrality of someone putting information in front of someone else and letting them decide what to do with it. Harry filed it. The note felt important in the way that things felt important when you didn't have enough context yet and had to wait for the context to arrive. We'll keep looking, Robart said. She put down her sorbet spoon. I want to be direct with you about something. Please do, Harry said. The Auror department has not, historically, served you well, she said. Under Fudge, under the political management of the last 2 years, decisions were made about your safety and your situation that I am not comfortable with, having read the files. I became head Auror 3 weeks ago. She looked at him steadily. I am telling you now that the department's position has changed. You have full operational cooperation from us, starting today. She meant it. He could feel that she meant it, the clean directness of it, no layered agenda, just the genuine professional intention of someone who was good at their job and wanted to actually do it. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me. I need you alive and functional. That's strategic, not sentimental. But she said it with a quality that suggested the distinction was slightly more complicated than she was letting on. If you encounter anything, further watchers, communications from unknown sources, anything that feels connected, you come to me directly. I'll give you a contact method. She produced a small coin from her pocket and placed it on the table, a galleon, charmed, its marking slightly different from standard. Harry picked it up. Warm it, she said. I'll know. He turned the galleon over in his hand. DA coins, he said. She looked at him. I understand you invented that system. We've adopted a version of it department-wide. A pause. I thought you should know that. Harry closed his hand around the galleon. The warm metal, the familiar charm, it felt, in the specific way that small things sometimes did, like a link between different versions of what was possible. The 15-year-old who'd drawn those runes in his dormitory and the person sitting here now. The afternoon had gotten long and golden. Diagon Alley had recovered itself fully, the incident already becoming the story already becoming the thing people were telling each other with escalating detail. Harry could feel the ambient emotional temperature of the place as a kind of weather, the particular cocktail of excitement and relief and the slightly giddy quality of a community that has been reminded it is capable of fear and has discovered it is also capable of continuing afterward. He could feel something else too. Distant, very distant, like a signal at the edge of range. Not a person in the alley. Somewhere much further away. The same signal he'd been feeling distantly since the morning in the Dursleys' kitchen, when the ability had first woken up and the world had shifted around it. He'd been feeling it intermittently ever since, that far-off presence that registered on his new sensitivity as, aware of you. Considering. Not yet decided. Not Voldemort. Too clear for Voldemort, who had a quality of intentional suppression that made him feel like a room with all its windows blacked out. Someone else. The anonymous owl. Do not stop what you started. He looked at the galleon in his hand and then pocketed it. Later. He'd think about it properly later. I should go, Robard said, standing. Thank you for the briefing. Thank you for the contact, Harry said. She nodded at him, a specific nod, the kind between equals, and left. Hermione immediately leaned across the table. She's good, she said quietly. Yes, Harry agreed. And the coin? We'll need it. Ron was looking at the empty chair where Robard's had been. So we've got Dumbledore training you, Robard's department backing you, the Order watching, and Voldemort sending observers. He looked at Harry. Is this what the rest of the year looks like? Probably, Harry said. Great, Ron said, with the specific sigh of someone who has accepted the situation and is now focusing on its practical implications. Do you want my cone? It's been sitting there melting since Robard's turned up and I don't want it to be sad. Yes, Harry said, and took the cone. They walked back through the alley in the long evening light, Harry and Hermione and Ron and Ginny in a loose, comfortable group, the sounds of the alley folding around them, the smell of summer and old magic. Ginny was saying something to Hermione about the holyhead harpies that Hermione was responding to with genuine interest. Ron was walking beside Harry with the easy comfort of someone who had been beside him in worse places and intended to remain. Harry let the reception stay open, just lightly, just ambient, not focused on any individual. The overall emotional texture of the alley in early evening. Families finishing their shopping. The relief of students who'd found their books. The particular satisfaction of shop owners closing their tills. The low-grade, pervasive unease that had been in every public wizarding space since Voldemort's return, like a minor key underneath everything, present, acknowledged, lived with. He could help with that, eventually. Not just the confrontational version, not just the Death Eater in the alley and the message to Voldemort. He could, with the full range of what this ability could do, help with that ambient fear. Not by removing it, fear was information and sometimes correct, but by adding something alongside it. The warmth he'd put into the Dursleys' kitchen. The light shifting, the pastries smelling stronger, the room feeling briefly like a room full of people who meant each other well. He'd done it accidentally, to strangers, for most of his life. He was only now starting to understand what it could look like on purpose. The leaky cauldron came into view at the far end. Tom behind the bar, the usual evening crowd, the portal to Muggle London beyond it. Harry felt the distant signal again, that far-off awareness at the edge of range. And this time it was slightly closer than before. As though whoever it was had moved while he wasn't paying attention. As though they'd been making their way toward him for a while now and were in no hurry because they knew he'd still be there when they arrived. He noted it. Said nothing. Walked through the leaky cauldron with his friends, back into the Muggle world, back toward the Burrow and Mrs. Weasley's dinner and Ron's room with its orange everything and the particular quality of ordinary life that was not ordinary at all when you understood what it cost to protect it. His wand was in his pocket. The galleon was in his other pocket. The effective transference was present and available and becoming, day by day, something more than a reactive burst in a kitchen at sunrise. Somewhere across the city, a Death Eater was trying to explain to Voldemort what had happened to him in Diagon Alley. Trying to describe the experience of having his own suppressed self-knowledge handed back to him by a 16-year-old who had walked directly toward him without breaking stride. Good, Harry thought. Let him explain. The evening settled over London like a held breath. Chapter 4. The shape of old wounds. Hogwarts in September always smelled the same, cold stone and warm candles and the particular ancient dustiness of a building that had been absorbing the lives of children for 1,000 years and had opinions about it. Harry stepped off the boats. He hadn't taken the carriages, had wanted the water, the lake, the specific ritual of arriving the way he'd arrived at 11 when everything was still impossible and new, and put his feet on the stone steps and felt the castle notice him. That was new. Or rather, he was newly aware of it. The castle had always had a quality of attention, every student felt it, that sense of being inside something that was more than a building, but now he could feel the texture of it, the way you could feel a change in air pressure. Old magic. Watching. Not hostile, not welcoming exactly. Just, present. Aware. He stood at the top of the steps while the other first years streamed past him and looked up at the towers against the September sky and thought, I know something about you that I didn't know before. You're blocking the door, Ginny said, from behind him. He moved. The great hall sorting was its usual controlled chaos, nervous first years, the Sorting Hat's annual song which this year had a sharper edge to it, something about unity and the cost of choosing comfortable blindness, which made several teachers look at each other. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table with Ron and Hermione and Neville and Dean and let the familiarity of it wash over him while keeping one hand loosely around his butterbeer and the other on the table, palm flat against the wood, feeling the vibrations of 700 people in one room. He was learning to calibrate it. That was most of what the summer had been, alongside the formal sessions with Dumbledore, learning to manage the reception without it overwhelming him. A room of 700 was a lot of emotional information if you left everything open. He'd developed something like an adjustable aperture, wide when he needed the full picture, narrow when he needed to think. Right now he had it narrow, just the table, just his friends, and the general texture of the room as background. The table felt normal. Ron was nervous about something he wasn't saying yet. Hermione was cataloging the new first years against some internal metric. Neville was happy in the specific way he'd been happy since the Department of Mysteries, the way you were happy after surviving something and realizing the surviving had changed you. Ginny was at the far end of the table looking at nothing in particular and feeling, as far as Harry could tell, completely self-contained, which was its own kind of interesting. He put that in a pocket with several other things he was managing carefully and not examining in the middle of the sorting. McGonagall's start-of-term speech was precise and brisk and contained, midway through, a single sentence that made the hall go quiet. Extra evening hours in the defense classroom have been allocated to students who wish to use them, supervised by a rotating roster of teachers. She didn't say why. She didn't say for what. She didn't say who had suggested it. But she met Harry's eyes once, briefly, and he understood. The DA, made formal. Sort of. Officially unofficial. She talked to Dumbledore, Hermione said quietly. Probably she talked to Dumbledore and then told him what had been decided, Harry said. Hermione almost smiled. The first Dumbledore session happened on a Wednesday evening in the third week of September, in a room Harry hadn't been in before, small, north-facing, high up in the castle in a tower he'd never had reason to use. Stone floor, a fireplace, 2 chairs, a worn rug between them. The simplicity of it was deliberate, no desk between them, nothing formal, just a fire and 2 chairs and the oldest and most straightforwardly powerful wizard Harry had ever met sitting with his hands on his knees and watching him. Tell me what you've been practicing, Dumbledore said. The calibration, Harry said. Managing the reception so it's not overwhelming. I've been working on the difference between ambient reading and directed, passive versus active. And I've been practicing the positive projection. The warmth. He paused. It's harder than the pain. Always is, Dumbledore said. Why do you think that is? Because the pain has more mass, Harry said. It's more certain. Joy is lighter and less sure of itself. Dumbledore tilted his head. Say more. When I project the warmth, the positive things, it needs to be absolutely genuine. Any dilution and it just goes flat. It doesn't land. Harry looked at the fire. The pain is always completely genuine. I never have any trouble being certain about it. And the joy? The joy is genuine too. It's just, he searched for it. I've had less practice believing in it. The pain is something I've had to understand completely to survive it. The joy I've mostly just received when it came, without examining it properly. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then that is the work, he said. Not building more capacity for pain, you have ample. Building the same quality of relationship with your happiness. Understanding it as completely as you understand your suffering. Harry nodded slowly. I've been trying. He stopped. Then, honestly, it's uncomfortable in a different way. Joy often is, Dumbledore said, for people who learned early that it wasn't reliable. He paused. What is the clearest example you can find? The most unambiguous happiness you've experienced? Harry thought. Not performed the thinking, actually went looking. He had a habit of skimming past the good things, moving through them without staying, where the difficult things he had catalogued with the thoroughness of someone taking inventory in a room he lived in. He looked for the clearest happiness. The least complicated. Flying. His first time on a broom. Before he'd known anything, the lesson in the courtyard, the Nimbus 2000, the specific feeling of being above the ground for the first time and the world making a kind of sense it hadn't made a moment before. No one's approval required. No story attached. Just the cold air and the height and a body that had found its element. He felt it. Let himself feel it with the same completeness he'd given to the pain. The fire warmed. The room shifted, fractionally, subtly. The cold from the stone walls backed off a degree. The light from the fireplace had a quality of afternoon sun in it that it shouldn't have given the time of day. Dumbledore sat completely still, eyes closed, and a small expression crossed his face that Harry recognized with a slight shock. It was the expression of someone outdoors in good weather. Purely physical. Unconsciously received. Then it passed, and the room was itself again. Better, Dumbledore said, opening his eyes. Much better than last week. I know what I was doing wrong last week, Harry said. I was trying to construct it. This time I just went and got it. Yes, Dumbledore said. The ability does not respond to construction. It responds to truth. He looked at Harry. This is why it cannot be learned by someone else, cannot be replicated, cannot be weaponized in the way most magic can. It requires that the caster actually feel what they're projecting. There is no shortcut. He paused. For someone whose entire life has been devoted to the elimination of his own emotional experience, this is significant. We're talking about Voldemort, Harry said. We're always talking about Voldemort, Dumbledore said. Though I wish we weren't. They worked for 2 hours. By the end Harry could hold the warmth projection for 8 minutes without it fading, could direct it at a specific person without spillover, and had discovered something new, a third mode that wasn't either pain or warmth but something in between, something he was calling truth neutral for want of a better name. The emotional reality of something without the effective charge. Pure information. Sitting in someone's awareness like a fact they suddenly knew. He'd used a version of this with the Death Eater in the alley. He was only now starting to understand what it was. Like clarity, Hermione said when he described it afterward in the library, her third-year notes on legilimency open beside her for comparison. Not what to feel about something, just, the thing itself, undressed. Yes, Harry said. Exactly. That's the most dangerous form, she said quietly. Isn't it? He looked at her. Pain can be endured. Warmth can be rejected, you can decide not to feel comforted. But clarity, she closed her legilimency notes. If you show someone something completely clearly, without any emotional framing, they have to deal with it exactly as it is. No interpretation available. No way to soften it with narrative. She looked at him. That's extraordinary, Harry. It's also the least developed, he said. I can barely hold it for 30 seconds. Yet, she said. Yet, he agreed. He was developing it, the truth-neutral form, on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in the defense classroom while the rotating teacher supervision gave him and his reconstituted DA the space to practice things the standard curriculum was still catching up to. He'd also been quietly practicing the reception during lessons, learning to feel the emotional texture of different classes at different times of day, what concentration felt like in aggregate versus boredom versus fear versus the specific quality of 20 people all understanding something simultaneously. That last one was remarkable. He'd started engineering for it, in the DA sessions. Positioning explanations to land at moments when the room was collectively ready. It was working. It was also making Snape angrier, though Harry had to admit Snape didn't need much help with that. The potions classroom in 6th year had a different quality than it had previously. Harry was taking advanced potions despite everything. Slughorn was the teacher now, which was its own complication that he was managing, but Snape was still his occlumency supervisor, by Dumbledore's arrangement, and the sessions had resumed in the second week of September with all the warmth and mutual goodwill of a natural disaster. The first session, Harry had walked in and set his bag down and sat opposite Snape across the bare desk, and they had looked at each other with the specific clarity of two people who had things to say that they had been not saying for a year. "Potter," Snape said. "Professor," Harry said. "We will continue where we left off." "We won't," Harry said. Snape looked at him. The particular controlled stillness of him, the black robes, the pale face, the eyes that were always doing something you couldn't quite track, didn't change, but something in the quality of the stillness shifted. "I beg your pardon," Snape said, and the words were cold and precise and extremely dangerous. "Last year's sessions didn't work," Harry said. "You know that." "I know that. We spent the year fighting each other in there, and Voldemort used the connection I was supposed to be blocking to kill my godfather." He held Snape's eyes. "So we're not doing it the same way again. And I suppose you have an alternative approach in mind," Snape said, with the tone he used when he wanted to make Harry's intelligence sound like an imposition. "Yes," Harry said. "I'll actually try. And you'll actually teach." Without using the sessions to, he stopped. Then continued, because he'd decided the truth was the only language worth speaking now, without using them to look through my memories for things you can use. Or to hurt me. Which is what last year was. The room was very quiet. "You are," Snape said, very carefully, "making serious accusations." "I'm making accurate observations," Harry said. "You know it." "I know it. Dumbledore, I suspect, knows it too and made a calculation about what was necessary. I'm not interested in the calculation anymore." Snape looked at him for a long moment. His face was doing nothing, the absolute blankness he was capable of that had always unnerved Harry because it felt like a wall designed for exactly that purpose. But Harry had the reception open, and Snape's face said nothing while everything beneath the surface was far less controlled. What Harry felt from Snape was, not what he expected. He'd expected something in the family of contempt. Or the cold resentment that Snape had always aimed at him like something personal and targeted. What he felt instead was, messy. Knotted. Old. Layers of something that had nothing to do with Harry directly, and at the bottom of all of it, the deepest, most buried, most genuinely agonizing layer, something that had Lily Potter's name on it. Oh, Harry thought. Oh. He'd known. In the abstract, the 6th-year version of himself had been assembling the information about Snape and his mother piece by piece, the way Snape reacted to Harry's resemblance to James, the way he'd always been less contemptuous when discussing Lily, the things Sirius had said, the things Lupin hadn't quite said. He'd had the outline. He'd just never been this close to the actual weight of it. "Professor," Harry said. Snape's jaw tightened. I know you loved her, Harry said quietly. The wall Snape had constructed across his face cracked. Not dramatically, not with any performance in it, just a small, precise fracture at the edge of the eyes, there and gone in a second but completely unmistakable. Do not, Snape said. His voice was very low. I'm not saying it as a weapon, Harry said. I'm saying it because it's true and we're both sitting in the middle of the consequences of it and neither of us is served by pretending it doesn't exist. I know what I can feel, Professor. Harry kept his voice level. Steady. Nothing punishing in it, he'd been careful about that, had made the decision before coming in that this was not going to be the Dursleys' kitchen. This was not about pain. I know you're not going to believe me when I say I'm not trying to use it. So I'm just going to say, the sessions last year hurt us both and served neither of us, and I want to do it differently. Snape said nothing. He was the most controlled person Harry had ever met and the control was visibly costing him more than usual, and Harry sat with that without pressing it. After a very long silence, Snape said, You will not bring her into these sessions again. All right, Harry said. Another silence. The reason last year's sessions failed, Snape said, and his voice had changed, not warm, not kind, but less weaponized, the specific sharp edge of it resheathed, was that you entered them with active resistance and he stopped. I did not sufficiently account for the emotional context. Sufficiently was doing significant work in that sentence. Harry let it. The mind can be trained in occlumency most effectively, Snape continued, when the practitioner has first developed a clear understanding of their own emotional landscape. The ability to organize and identify what one feels is the foundation of the ability to shield it. He paused. I am told you have been developing exactly that capacity. I have, Harry said. Then it is possible, Snape said, very carefully, that this year's sessions may be more productive. He did not say I'm sorry. He did not say anything that could be directly characterized as a concession. But Harry, with the reception lightly open, could feel the genuine quality of what was underneath the words, the specific cost of being, with Snape, this much less of a weapon. The effort it took. How long it had been since Severus Snape had spoken to anyone without at least one layer of protection between himself and whatever they could reach. I'd like to learn properly, Harry said. Occlumency and legilimency. Both. Snape looked at him. Legilimency is an advanced, I know. I want to learn it anyway. The instruction will be rigorous. Good. Another pause. Snape reached into the drawer of his desk and produced 2 small vials, a pensive gray substance that moved with the slow heaviness of extracted memory. These are, he said, methodology sessions from an occlumency instructor I trained under. They will establish a framework for this year's approach. He set them on the desk between them. I will not be entering your mind without explicit permission. In exchange, you will not, he stopped. I'll tell you when I'm using the ability, Harry said. In these sessions. I won't do it without warning. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Agreed, he said. They had not become friends. They had not resolved anything, not really, there were years of history between them that would not survive a single conversation, and Harry was not foolish enough to think one honest exchange constituted more than an opening. But something had shifted in the specific way that things shifted when 2 people decided, separately and simultaneously, that the current arrangement was too costly to maintain. He left the session 2 hours later feeling tired in a way that was different from his usual tired, a productive exhaustion, the kind that meant something had been built. He thought about Snape's love for his mother, the old, ruinous, completely honest kind. He thought about how Snape had spent 20 years being cruel to the son of the woman he'd loved, and whether that cruelty was the shape grief took when it had nowhere legitimate to go. He thought about the effective transference and the fact that he could have shown Snape something tonight that would have destroyed him, and that he had chosen not to. That choice felt more important, somehow, than the ability itself. He was still thinking about it when he rounded a corner on the 6th floor and nearly walked into Draco Malfoy. They stopped 3 feet apart. both with wands half drawn in the instinct of people who had spent 5 years in adversarial proximity. The corridor was empty, late enough that the castle's population had mostly redistributed toward beds and common rooms, the kind of hour where the only people in corridors were people doing things they'd chosen not to do publicly. Malfoy looked terrible. Harry had been registering it since the start of term, the weight loss, the shadows under his eyes, the way he moved now with the quality of someone braced for impact from a direction they couldn't fully locate. It was not the Malfoy of previous years, who had deployed his confidence with the precision of someone who'd been raised to understand its value. This was someone whose confidence had been stripped away and who was trying to maintain the posture of it without the substance. The reception, even narrow as Harry had it, caught the full weight of what was underneath. It hit him like cold water. Fear. Genuine, bone-deep, constant fear. Not of Harry, not specifically, not right now, but of something much closer and more immediate. The fear of someone who has been given a task they do not know how to complete, and who understands that failing it has a specific and catastrophic consequence. Harry lowered his wand. Malfoy watched him do it. Did not lower his own. "What are you doing on this floor?" Malfoy said. His voice had the quality of someone practicing hardness they hadn't had to practice before. "Walking," Harry said. "At midnight." "Yes." Malfoy's wand was still up. His hand, Harry noticed, was not entirely steady. "Malfoy," Harry said. "Don't," Malfoy said. "Don't what?" "Don't do the thing." His jaw was tight. "Whatever the thing you did to the Death Eater in Diagon Alley. Everybody knows about it. Don't." "I wasn't going to," Harry said. "You say that." "I don't need to," Harry said. "Whatever you're carrying right now, Malfoy, I don't need to show you it. You already know exactly what it is." Malfoy's wand arm dropped by 3 inches. Not intentional, his body's response to something that landed. "You're not as hidden as you think," Harry said, not unkindly. "The fear is, it's coming off you in waves. Has been since September 1st. He paused. "Whatever Voldemort asked you to do, you don't want to do it." "Shut up," Malfoy said. Very quietly. "I'm not telling anyone," Harry said. "I'm not gathering intelligence. I'm just," he stopped. "I can see it, Malfoy. That's all. The same way you can see someone standing in the rain without having to ask them if they're wet." Malfoy looked at him. Under all the practiced contempt and the fear and the exhaustion and the specific grief of someone who has discovered that the world they were raised to believe in has requirements they didn't account for, under all of it, Harry felt the specific shape of a 16-year-old who had been handed a loaded gun and told it was an honor. "There are people who can help," Harry said. "Not the Order necessarily. Just, people. If it comes to that." "It won't come to that," Malfoy said, and the words were learned, the specific sound of a line repeated until it approximated conviction. "All right," Harry said. "But you know where I am." He walked past Malfoy and continued down the corridor without looking back. He felt Malfoy standing in the middle of the corridor behind him, still, uncertain, the emotional texture of someone at a crossroads who hasn't decided which way to go yet. He didn't push it. He'd said what was true, and true things didn't need pushing. He was back in the common room and halfway up the dormitory stairs when he felt the distant signal again. It was much closer now. Not distant at all, inside the castle, he thought. Somewhere in the castle. That far-off awareness he'd been tracking since Privet Drive, the presence that moved deliberately and knew he was tracking it and was apparently unbothered by this fact. He stood on the stairs and let the reception go wide. Stone. Old magic. The castle's deep attention. And somewhere in the east wing, 3rd floor, he thought, though the castle's geometry was never entirely reliable, something that felt like no one he'd met but like several people he'd lost. Like grief and stubborn purpose and 60 years of knowing more than it was comfortable to know and still getting up in the morning. He filed it. Went to bed. The note came the next morning. Tucked under his plate at breakfast, which meant someone with access to the kitchens or the great hall before it opened. A single line in that familiar cramped, angular handwriting. East Corridor, 3rd floor. Tonight, 11 o'clock. Come alone. Leave the ability open. Harry read it twice. Put it in his pocket. Ate his porridge. You're doing the thing, Ron said. What thing? The thing where you know something and you're not saying it yet. I know lots of things I'm not saying, Harry said. This is a specific kind of not saying, Ron said. It has a particular look. I'll tell you tomorrow, Harry said. Why tomorrow? Because tonight I need to see what it is first. Ron looked at him for a long moment. You're going somewhere tonight and you're not telling me because you know I'd come and this needs to be just you. Yes, Harry said. I hate this, Ron said. I know. Be careful. Always. You're never careful, Ron said. You're competent, which is different. Harry considered that. Fair. He went to the East Corridor at 11. Cloak on, wand out, Marauder's map in his other hand, old habits, structural rather than anxious. The castle at night was its own world, the version of it that only existed after midnight when the students were in their towers and the portraits were doing whatever portraits did when no one was watching, which seemed to involve a lot of visiting. The 3rd floor East Corridor was empty on the map. Every room along it showed no dots. Harry stopped at the end of the corridor and put the map away and stood in the dark and let the reception go completely open. Stone. Cold. Old magic. Anne, you've been looking for me, said a voice. It came from no particular direction, which was a significant clue. And it had a quality, warm and somewhat dry and carefully calibrated, that was familiar enough to make something tighten in Harry's chest. You're a ghost, he said. Not exactly, said the voice. An echo, Harry said. A piece of someone who chose to stay. A pause. That's quite perceptive. I've been feeling you for 2 months, Harry said. You feel like grief and purpose and a very long time. He paused. You feel like someone who watched things happen for years and couldn't stop them. Yes, said the voice, and this time it carried a weight that was unmistakably real. The air in the corridor changed. Not temperature exactly. Density. The specific shift of a very old presence making itself available to be perceived. Harry turned slowly. She was not visible, not in the traditional ghost way, not the pearlescent transparency of nearly headless Nick. She was more like a quality of light that had taken on an intention. The suggestion of a woman, elderly, sharply alert, radiating the specific stubbornness of someone who had refused to finish until they'd finished what they'd started. You sent the letter, Harry said. I sent the letters, she said. More than one, over the years, to people I hoped would matter. Yours was the first that someone actually received. Who are you? My name, she said, was Mira Aldrich. I was a teacher at this school from 1941 to 1963. I was Tom Riddle's history of magic professor for the 6 years he attended. Harry was very still. I knew, she said. I want you to understand that first. I knew what he was doing, what he was becoming, and I was not believed, and I was not capable of stopping it, and I have been here since 1963 in the specific way that people stay when there is something unfinished. A pause. He was my student. Whatever he became, he was first my student, and I carry that. What do you want? Harry asked. To tell you what I know, she said. About Tom. The version of him before he finished choosing what he wanted to be. The version that might be relevant to what you can do. Harry sat down on the corridor floor. The stone was cold through his cloak. He didn't care. Tell me, he said. She told him. She told him about Tom Riddle at 11, the particular quality of him, the intelligence that was genuinely extraordinary and the hunger underneath it that had nothing to do with food or material things. The hunger to be explained. To be given a framework that made sense of what he was. She told him about the way Tom had, in his first year, sought out every teacher individually with questions that were so precise and well-framed that you didn't notice until afterward that he was mapping your knowledge, finding its edges, filing the shape of your expertise for future use. She told him about the boy who had, at 13, asked her why the wizarding world treated Muggleborns differently if magic itself showed no such preference. She told him the question had seemed, at the time, like the beginning of wisdom. She told him what it had become instead. She told him about the specific moment, she pinpointed it, the Michaelmas term of 1944, Tom at 17, when she had watched something close in his face. Not an event, not a trauma in the conventional sense. A decision. The final one, the one that said, the vulnerability of being undefended is too great. I will remove it. All of it. He had been hurt, she said. Specifically and genuinely. I won't tell you the details because they're not mine to give. But he had been hurt in the way that the most significant early pain requires, by someone he had trusted. And instead of doing what you did in that kitchen in Surrey, she paused. Instead of showing it to someone, he folded it inward. Buried it. Built over it so comprehensively that within 6 months you could not see the join. But it's still there, Harry said. It's still there, she confirmed. I have been watching him for 60 years from this corridor, in the way that echoes watch, not quite present, not quite absent. The things he buried in 1944 are still exactly where he put them, because burying is not the same as resolving, and the most comprehensively armored people are also the most comprehensively trapped by what they armored themselves against. Harry let that settle. When you face him, she said, and I am telling you this having watched you for 2 months, having felt what you are capable of since you were a child in this castle, when you face him, you will not break him with pain. He is too old at suffering to be broken by it. But the truth-neutral form, she paused. The one you're developing. The clarity without charge. Show him what he actually is, stripped of every story he has told himself about what he chose and why. Not your anger about it. Not the world's horror at it. Just the fact of it, clean and unavoidable. Why would that work better than pain? Harry asked. Because pain can be contextualized, she said. He has been contextualizing pain for 60 years. He has a story for every terrible thing, it was necessary, it was strength, it was proof of something. But clarity, the pure fact of a thing, without the narrative, her presence shifted slightly, something almost sad in it. The narrative is all he has left, Harry. Underneath the narrative there is nothing. And he knows it. Somewhere, in the oldest buried part of him, he knows there is nothing there. The truth-neutral form would not tell him something new. It would show him something he cannot stop being afraid of. Harry sat with that in the cold corridor for a long time. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. Why him? He paused. Why does someone become what he became? When they're 11 and the magic works and someone comes and says you belong somewhere, why does someone still end up? That, she said, is the question I've been sitting with for 60 years. A long silence. I don't have a clean answer. I have a partial one. The magic that calls to children like Tom, children who have been told in every available way that they are nothing, that they belong to no one, that magic arrives like rescue. And in some children it is rescue. In others, the hunger underneath the wound is so deep that rescue is not enough. What they want is immunity. What they want is to become something that can never be hurt the way they were hurt. And the pursuit of immunity, she paused. Immunity from pain is immunity from everything. It is the removal of the self by self-defense. Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs. About the specific despair of a child who wants to be looked at kindly and has learned to stop wanting. He thought about all the ways he could have gone. All the choices that have been available at various forks in the road. The Sorting Hat and you could be great, Slytherin would help you on the way to greatness. The ease with which bitterness had always been available to him, just there, always accessible, any time he'd wanted to pick it up. He hadn't. He wasn't entirely sure why. Sirius, partly. Ron and Hermione. Mrs. Weasley's first hug. But mostly, he thought, sitting on the cold stone, mostly because someone had loved him first, completely, before he could remember or choose, in a way that left something in him like a candle that difficult things couldn't extinguish. His mother. Her magic. Her warmth, handed to him through the oldest transference of all. "Thank you," he said. "For the letter. For staying." "I couldn't leave," she said. "Not before someone was ready to hear it." A pause. "I think I can go now." Her presence was already fading, not disappearing exactly, more like completing. Like a breath fully exhaled. "Go on then," Harry said. "Good luck, Harry Potter," said Mira Aldrich. The corridor was empty. Harry sat in the dark for a while. Hedwig's absence was a specific kind of quiet. He'd left her in the dormitory, which she'd commented on with a pointed look. The Marauder's map was in his pocket, the Galleon Robards had given him in the other. 2 months of building a picture that was getting clearer every week. He thought about Tom Riddle at 17, folding pain inward. Building over it. He thought about what was underneath. He got up, put his cloak back on, and went to bed. The next morning, Dumbledore was waiting outside the Great Hall when Harry arrived for breakfast. Not urgently, just standing there with the morning's Daily Prophet and a cup of tea and the specific quality of a man who has arranged to be somewhere rather than appearing there coincidentally. "Walk with me a moment," Dumbledore said. They walked. "Something happened last night," Dumbledore said, not asking. "Yes. Do you want to tell me?" Harry thought about the corridor. About Mira Aldrich and 60 years of a promise to a student she'd failed. About the specific weight of staying. "In our next session," Harry said. "I want to work on the truth-neutral form. Not just holding it longer, I want to work on precision. Targeting a specific buried thing in a specific person and illuminating just that, without spillover." Dumbledore was quiet for 3 steps. "You found something," he said. "I've been told something," Harry said. "About what to look for. And you're not telling me all of it yet." "Not yet." Dumbledore looked at him sideways. The half-moon spectacles, the beard, the burgundy robes. The man who had managed him for 6 years and was learning, gradually and genuinely, that management was not the same as trust. "All right," Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. "Thank you." They reached the doors of the Great Hall. Breakfast sounds were already well underway, the clatter and conversation of 700 people beginning their day. "One thing," Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. "The truth-neutral form, the clarity without charge. It is the most precise of the 3 modes." He paused. "It is also the one that requires the most from you, because to project truth without effect, without any personal investment in how it lands," he stopped. "You have to be extraordinarily at peace with the thing you're showing. You cannot be afraid of it yourself. You cannot be angry about it. It has to simply be true, in you, before it can be true in someone else." He looked at Harry steadily. "Which means that for you to show Tom Riddle the truth of what he is, without charge, I have to stop being afraid of him," Harry said. "And stop being angry." "Yes." Harry considered that. It was enormous and very simple, and sitting in the middle of it was the work of the next several months made suddenly visible in a single sentence. "All right," he said. He went in to breakfast. Ron had saved him a seat. Hermione had saved him toast and was pretending she hadn't because she always pretended she hadn't. Ginny was 3 seats down laughing at something Neville had said. The hall was loud and warm and full of the particular morning energy of people beginning things, essays, classes, the incremental daily project of being 16 and alive in a world that was asking too much of them and somehow still producing, in the spaces between the asking, moments of complete and genuine joy. Harry sat down and ate his toast and felt the room, all of it, wide open for one moment, and what he felt was so much of everything that it was almost too much, and it was also, undeniably, mostly good. He narrowed the aperture. Smiled at something Ron said. Passed Hermione the marmalade before she asked for it, which made her look at him with the specific fondness of someone who finds being known by a friend an unreasonable comfort. Tomorrow, precision work with Dumbledore. The truth-neutral form. Tonight, the thing Malfoy had in his eyes in the corridor. Next week, Robards had sent a message via the galleon. New intelligence. When you're ready. The pieces were assembling. Not neatly, this was never going to be neat, but honestly. Each piece actually being what it looked like it was, rather than what someone decided to present it as. That was all he'd ever wanted, really. The truth, arriving in the shape of itself. He looked up at the enchanted ceiling, gray September morning clouds, the light coming through anyway, the way it always did. Chapter 5, every single one the intelligence Robards sent was 3 pages long and arrived via the galleon on a Thursday afternoon in late October when Harry was sitting in the Gryffindor common room working on a transfiguration essay he'd been meaning to finish since Tuesday. The coin warmed in his pocket and he excused himself from the common room before Ron could ask what he was doing, took the stairs 2 at a time to the empty 7th floor corridor, and tapped it twice. 30 seconds later Robards apparat to the corridor entrance with the focused, slightly windswept quality of someone who had come directly from somewhere else. 3 simultaneous attacks, she said, before he'd fully oriented toward her. 2 nights ago. Azkaban perimeter, St. Mungo's East Ward, and the Hogwarts Express Maintenance Depot outside Edinburgh. She handed him a folded report. Nothing succeeded. All 3 were repelled. But that's not the point. Harry unfolded the report. Read the first page quickly. They weren't trying to succeed, he said. No, Robards said. They were measuring response times. Testing how quickly we move, how many we deploy, which direction we look first. She watched him read. He's planning something larger. The 3 sites are a triangle. If you draw it on a map, the center point is Hogsmeade, Harry said. Hogsmeade, she confirmed. He looked up from the report. When? We don't know. Our best estimate is before Christmas. He's been accelerating everything since Diagon Alley. She held his eyes. Since word of what you did got back to him. He's not being patient anymore. Harry folded the report and gave it back to her. He's coming here because of me. He's coming here because of multiple things, Robards said carefully. You, the school, what the school represents, the strategic advantage of, he's coming here because of me, Harry said again. Not self-importantly, just clearly. The rest is window dressing. He wants to understand what I can do in person because you can't understand this ability from a report. He knows that. He thought about Mira Aldridge in the dark corridor. About Tom Riddle at 17 deciding to become immune to pain. He's going to come himself. Robards was quiet for a moment. Our intelligence suggests Voldemort will not deploy proxies for this one, yes. Then we stop preparing for a siege and start preparing for a conversation, Harry said. She looked at him. That's not, I know it's not conventional, Harry said. But a siege assumes the goal is to prevent him reaching me. I want him to reach me. I need to be in range. He paused. Keep the defensive preparations. Keep the horrors, the order, the perimeter. But understand that the outcome of this doesn't come from the perimeter. It comes from what happens when we're face to face. Robards studied him for a long moment. She was good at reading people, it was what made her good at her job, and whatever she was reading in Harry right now, it was settling her rather than alarming her, which he took as confirmation that he was making sense. The precision work, she said. How is it developing? Better every session, Harry said. I can hold it for 4 minutes now. I can target without spillover. I've been working on he paused. On not being afraid of him. On not being angry. That's the piece I'm still building. And how is that going? Harry was honest. It's going. She nodded. I'll increase the perimeter intelligence gathering. You'll have updates through the coin as they come in. She paused, and something in her professional composure shifted slightly, not unprofessional, just more human. Harry. You understand what you're describing, putting yourself in front of Voldemort deliberately and without a conventional strategy, is terrifying, Harry said. I was going to say unprecedented. That too, Harry said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she disapparated. Harry stood in the empty corridor with the wind from somewhere in the castle making the torch flames lean sideways and thought, 6 weeks. He went back to his transfiguration essay. The 6 weeks that followed had a particular quality, dense and fast and very full, the way time felt when it was building towards something and you knew it and couldn't do anything except become as ready as possible. The DA sessions intensified. Not because Harry announced anything, he didn't need to, the group had a collective intelligence that had always been one of its strengths, but because the people in that room had been paying attention since September and they could feel the shift and register the way you felt weather changing. They drilled the spells they were weakest in. They worked on coordinated casting. Harry spent 2 sessions working on group emotional calibration, an application of the passive form he'd been developing, which was the ability to extend a kind of shared clarity to a group of people in combat, helping them read the situation and each other more accurately without having to communicate it explicitly. It worked remarkably well on Neville, who had always had the instincts but struggled with the real-time confidence. It worked on Dean. It worked on Luna Lovegood, who arrived at the 4th session with her usual quality of occupying a slightly different layer of reality than everyone else and who, under Harry's extended projection, became something startling, completely focused, every instinct she had sharpened to a point, her unusual perception turned from lateral to precise. She took down 3 people in the same exercise afterward and looked mildly surprised by herself. You're remarkable when you decide to be, Harry told her. I'm always remarkable, Luna said pleasantly. It just usually looks different. He had his last Dumbledore session 2 weeks before the end of October. They worked for 3 hours, longer than any previous session, and by the end Harry could hold the truth-neutral form for 11 minutes and direct it at a specific target with a specificity that Dumbledore tested by thinking of something carefully chosen and asking Harry to project the clarity of it at him without knowing its content. Harry sat across from him with his hands on his knees and his eyes open and put out the truth-neutral form like a very precise light. Dumbledore sat very still for 60 seconds. Then he opened his eyes. How much did you see? He asked. I didn't see anything, Harry said. I can't read minds. He paused. I showed you it clearly. Whatever you were thinking about. Yes, Dumbledore said. You did. He was quiet for a moment. What I was thinking about was the night I left you on the Dursleys' doorstep. The specific decision. I wanted to test whether your projection could reach something that old and that deliberately managed. A pause. It can. Harry said nothing. I'm not telling you this as guilt, Dumbledore said. I'm telling you because it confirms your ability in a meaningful way. The truth-neutral form accessed something I have been carrying for 16 years and showed it to me without any interpretation attached. He looked at Harry steadily. It is extraordinary, and it is ready. I know, Harry said. How are you feeling about what's coming? Harry thought about the question honestly. I'm not afraid of him, he said. Not in the way I used to be. The fear was always about, he stopped. Tried again. I think I was afraid of him because he wanted to unmake me. That was what he represented. The possibility of being erased. He paused. But I understand what he actually is now. Mira Aldrich was right. Underneath everything he chose to become, there's nothing. Just the original wound, and 60 years of architecture built over it. He looked at Dumbledore. I don't fear nothing. I'm sorry for it, which is different. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Sorry for it, he said. He was 11 once, Harry said. He could have been any number of things. He chose this, and those choices are his, and I'm not excusing them. But sorry and afraid are different things. They are, Dumbledore said quietly. And of the two, sorry is the one that will serve you. Because anger can be countered and fear can be exploited, Harry said. But compassion for something, genuine clarity about what it actually is, that doesn't give anyone a handle. Dumbledore was quiet. You worked that out yourself, he said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite pride but was in the same territory. I had help, Harry said. Voldemort came on the 1st of November. Harry felt him before anyone else did, 3 in the morning, the castle asleep around him, and then the distant signal he'd been tracking all year shifted from background awareness to immediate and certain, the way a sound you'd been half hearing suddenly became the only sound. He was out of bed before his conscious mind had fully processed it. He was dressed and at the door of the dormitory when Ron's voice came from behind him, thick with sleep and alarm. Harry. Get the DA, Harry said. Get McGonagall. Tell them it's starting. He was in the corridor before Ron responded. The castle knew it too. He could feel it in the stone under his feet, the old magic vibrating at a frequency it only reached under genuine threat, a deep structural alertness. Portraits along the corridor were empty, their occupants already running through their painted worlds with messages. The stairways were aligning themselves, which they only did deliberately when someone who understood them was directing it, the castle helping, in its ancient and particular way. He took the stairs down to the entrance hall and pushed open the front doors. The grounds of Hogwarts in early November were cold and dark and still. The lake to his right was black and absolutely flat. The Forbidden Forest was a dense absence. The path down to Hogsmeade was a paler grey stripe in the dark, and at the far end of it, at the boundary of the anti-apparition ward that Robards had extended to cover the full perimeter, there was light. Not spellfire yet. Just light, the cold, colorless light of a large group of people with wands raised, their magic collectively illuminating the dark in the way that battle-prepared wizards illuminated before they moved. Harry stood on the front steps and felt the full scope of what was there. 30, 40 people, Death Eaters, organized, their individual emotional signatures identifiable even at this distance as the cold professionalism he'd felt in Diagon Alley magnified to a force. Experienced, deliberate, waiting. And behind them. Through them. The presence he'd been building toward since July. Voldemort. It was not like feeling a person. It was like feeling the absolute absence of something that should be there, the specific negative space of someone who had spent 60 years removing themselves from their own experience. No warmth. No fear he would acknowledge. Not quite nothing either, which was exactly what Mira Aldrich had said, the architecture, the chosen structures, and underneath them the original wound, still exactly where he'd put it in 1944, untouched, perfect, waiting. Harry walked down the front steps. Behind him he heard the doors open, McGonagall, several teachers, order members who'd been stationed in the castle, the leading edge of the DA running to keep up with him. He didn't look back. He kept walking down the path toward the perimeter, steady and unhurried, and felt the emotional weather of the Death Eaters change as they saw him coming, recalibration, uncertainty, the specific unease of people who had prepared for something and were finding the preparation does not cover this particular variable. He stopped at the perimeter boundary. The Death Eaters were 20 feet away on the other side. He could see them now, dark robes, masks, the white breath of 40 people in cold November air. Behind them, the space that was Voldemort resolved from presence into form. He was tall. Harry always forgot that, the films of memory from the graveyard and the ministry had the distortion of extreme circumstances, the way things looked when your nervous system was fully committed to survival. In ordinary dark, ordinary cold, just standing there, tall, pale, the red eyes catching the light from the wands around him. The face that had left behind everything a face usually carried. He looked at Harry across 20 feet of dark path, and Harry looked back. A long silence. In it, the castle behind Harry, the lake, the forest, the night. In front of him, 40 Death Eaters and the man who had killed his parents and spent 16 years trying to kill him and had been, before all of that, a child in a Muggle orphanage who had wanted nothing except to understand why he was what he was. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. His voice was not what people expected the first time. They expected something thunderous and performed. It was none of those things, it was quiet and certain and deeply, specifically intelligent, the voice of someone who had never needed volume because volume was for people who weren't sure of themselves. Tom, Harry said. The Death Eaters shifted. Even through their masks he could feel their response, the specific alarm of people who had watched their master be addressed by his original name and were bracing for the consequence. Voldemort looked at him. You've been busy, he said. Since the summer. So have you, Harry said. Azkaban perimeter, St. Mungo's, Edinburgh. You were measuring how quickly we'd respond. He paused. You could have just asked. A silence. In it, something happened that might have been amusement, except the machinery for genuine amusement had been removed some time ago. My sources described what you did at Privet Drive, Voldemort said. They described what you did in Diagon Alley. They were inadequate descriptions. He studied Harry. What is it you think you can do to me with this ability, Potter? Nothing you haven't already done to yourself, Harry said. A pause. Walk with me, Voldemort said. The Death Eaters shifted again. This was not the plan, whatever the plan had been. Harry could feel their collective uncertainty, the structure of obedience creating a specific kind of anxiety when the authority figure deviated from the expected script. Just you, Harry said. Not them. You think you can dictate terms. I think you came here because you want to understand something that your Death Eaters can't explain and your intelligence can't map, Harry said, and that requires proximity. Yes. Just you. Another silence. Voldemort moved through the perimeter boundary, past the ward, which he breached as easily as walking through smoke, and stopped 10 feet from Harry. The Death Eaters stayed where they were. 10 feet. The closest Harry had been to him since the graveyard, with the full use of his faculties. He kept the reception open and let himself feel the full scope of what was in front of him. The architecture was extraordinary. He'd known in the abstract that Voldemort had spent decades suppressing and severing his own emotional experience. The Horcruxes were the most extreme evidence of that, the literal fragmentation of the self as a defensive strategy. But feeling the architecture directly, at 10 feet, with the reception fully open, was something else entirely. It was like standing in front of a building that had been deliberately sealed, every window bricked over, every door welded shut, the original structure underneath still perfectly intact but made completely inaccessible by 60 years of deliberate construction over it. And Harry could feel, very precisely, where the original structure was. Could feel the shape of what was underneath all of it. The 1944 wound Mira Aldrich had told him about, he could feel its location now, the specific place where the architecture was thickest because that was where it had been built first and most urgently, the way scar tissue was thickest at the original injury. You're reading me, Voldemort said. Quiet. Certain. Yes, Harry said. And? You're afraid, Harry said. I transcended fear decades ago. You buried it, Harry said. Which is different. What you transcended was the ability to feel the fear. The fear itself he gestured slightly. Sealed over. Something happened in Voldemort's eyes. Very small. Very fast. You believe, Voldemort said, that showing me what I've suppressed will, what? Incapacitate me? Break me? You have a great deal of confidence in something you've had for 4 months. I've had it my whole life, Harry said. I just knew about it for 4 months. And what do you intend to show me? Nothing new, Harry said. That's the point. He held Voldemort's eyes, the red, strange, inhuman eyes that had chosen to make themselves inhuman, and he said, I'm going to show you what you already know. The thing at the bottom. You can feel it right now, actually, the fact that I'm close enough to feel it means you can feel it too. That's how the ability works. It's bidirectional. A beat. You're frightened, Harry said, that there was never anything underneath the power. That all the choices, the Horcruxes, the killings, my parents, all of it, were in service of protecting something that had already gone. The November dark was absolutely still. You're going to tell me, Voldemort said, very quietly, that it hasn't gone. Harry looked at him. I'm not going to tell you anything, he said. I'm going to show you something that's true. He put out the truth-neutral form. Not the pain, not the tidal wave from the Dursleys' kitchen, not his history deployed as a weapon. Not the warmth either. The clarity. The precision mode. 11 minutes of practiced control brought to bear on the most specific possible target, the single true thing he had been given to understand about Tom Riddle, the fact at the bottom that was still there regardless of everything constructed over it. The original wound. The original want. The boy in the orphanage who had felt magic move through him for the first time and had experienced, before anything else, before any decision had been made, a single moment of pure and complete connection, the world recognizing him, his own nature recognizing itself, and the feeling of that, which was not power and not triumph and not the cold satisfaction of superiority, but something much simpler and more human. The feeling of not being alone. Harry showed him that. Just that. Clean, undressed, without his own grief or anger attached to it, Mira Aldridge's 60-year-old gift of understanding, translated into the truth-neutral form with absolute precision. Not look what you destroyed. Not look what you could have been. Just, this happened. This was real. This was the moment before everything else, when you were 11 years old and the world reached back. Voldemort made no sound. He stood absolutely still, and in the reception Harry felt the architecture do something it had not done in 60 years, not collapse, not shatter, but flex. A single structural flex, the whole sealed building shifting slightly on its foundations as the truth-neutral form found the original wound and illuminated it without mercy or kindness, just clarity. What the clarity showed was not devastation. It showed something much more difficult. It showed that it had been real. That the 11-year-old had been real. That the moment of recognition, magic, belonging, the world reaching back, had been genuine and complete, and that everything built over it since had not unmade it, could not unmake it, because it was still there, perfectly preserved, in the place where Tom Riddle had sealed it in 1944 and built a monster over it to make sure no one could use it against him. Including himself. The reception gave Harry the shape of what happened to Voldemort then. Not the content, he couldn't read minds, couldn't know the specific thought, but the emotional architecture flexing and flexing and flexing, 60 years of sealed structure responding to a single sustained moment of true clarity like ice responding to temperature. Not cracking. Not breaking. Melting. Very slowly. It lasted perhaps 3 minutes. Harry held the projection steady, full 4 minutes of capacity, not 11, because some of the 11 was still theoretical and this was real, and he would not risk faltering, and kept it clean and clear and completely without charge. Then he let it go. The November night reasserted itself. Cold. Still. Voldemort stood 5 feet away. At some point during the projection they drifted closer, or he had, Harry wasn't sure which, and he was completely still and his face was doing nothing at all and behind his eyes something was happening that Harry had never seen on any human face before because it was the specific expression of someone looking at something they had been running from for 60 years and finding that it was still, inescapably, themselves. You should know, Harry said quietly, that I didn't do that to win an argument. Voldemort looked at him. I did it, Harry said, because it's true. And because you've been building over it for 60 years and that building has killed hundreds of people and it will kill hundreds more if it continues, and I wanted you to have to look at what it's built over. He paused. That's all. A silence that had a completely different quality from any silence before it. You're not what I expected, Voldemort said. His voice had changed, imperceptibly to anyone without the reception, but Harry could hear it. The specific texture of a voice when the architecture behind it has just shifted. I know, Harry said. You expected someone trying to defeat you. And you're not. I'm trying to show you the truth, Harry said. They're different things. Something moved across Voldemort's face. Not emotion in the conventional sense, the machinery was too damaged for that. But something. The ghost of something that the machinery had originally been built to suppress. Then his mask came back. Not completely, not the old, total, seamless mask. But it came back. This changes nothing, Voldemort said. It changes everything, Harry said. You'll feel it change. Not today. But you will. Voldemort looked at him for a long, final moment. Then he said, your ability is as described. More refined than described. Was that why you came? Harry said. Really? A pause. No, Voldemort said. And that single honest syllable cost him something visible, the small structural fracture of someone who had trained themselves to never, under any circumstances, give a straight answer, being honest by accident. He seemed to notice it. His jaw tightened. I came, he said, more controlled, to assess whether you were a threat that needed to be addressed immediately. And? The red eyes held his. And I find that I need to think. He turned. Harry watched him walk back through the perimeter, back through the line of Death Eaters who parted for him with the reflex of long habit, back into the dark beyond the wards. The Death Eaters looked at each other. At Harry. At each other again. Go, Harry said. They went. The grounds of Hogwarts were empty. The lake was black and flat and the forest was its permanent, opaque self, and the castle behind Harry was blazing with light, every window, the moving light of people woken and mobilized and waiting for what came next. Nothing came next. Harry stood at the perimeter for another minute. Then he turned around and walked back up the path. McGonagall was at the foot of the front steps with an expression that combined professional composure with the very human quality of someone whose hands were not entirely steady. Beside her, Dumbledore, who had arrived at some point in the last 20 minutes and who was standing with his hands clasped and his eyes on Harry with the expression of someone receiving news that they had hoped for and had not quite allowed themselves to believe in. Robards was 20 feet to the left with 6 Aurors, her eyes scanning the perimeter with the thorough professional attention of someone doing her job even while the unusual thing was happening. Behind them on the steps, the leading edge of the DA, Ron first, then Hermione, then Ginny, Neville, Luna, others spreading out behind them. Ron's face was doing something complicated. He'd clearly been watching from somewhere he could see the path, which meant he'd seen Harry and Voldemort standing 10 feet apart in the dark. His expression was the specific mixture of someone who has known for a long time that their best friend is extraordinary and still finds the direct evidence of it periodically overwhelming. What happened? McGonagall said. I talked to him, Harry said. We saw, she said carefully. It did not look like, I know what it looked like. He came up the steps and stopped in front of Dumbledore. The Horcruxes still exist. This isn't over. He has 40 Death Eaters who are not changed by what happened to him tonight, and he has an organization and resources. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. But something happened to him that hasn't happened in 60 years. And the version of him that comes back from that is going to be different from the one that arrived. Dumbledore was quiet. Different how? He said. Cracked, Harry said. Not broken. Not defeated. But cracked. He paused. He felt the truth of what he actually was for about 3 minutes. That doesn't go away. Dumbledore's eyes were bright. No, he said. It does not. McGonagall made a controlled sound that was her version of exhaling with relief. Robards, from 20 feet away, gave Harry a look that said, We will debrief this thoroughly and soon. Harry nodded at her. Yes. He turned and looked at his friends on the steps. At Ron, who was trying not to show how frightened he'd been. At Hermione, who was doing the thing where she was analyzing and feeling simultaneously and was very nearly overwhelmed by both. At Neville, who had come fully into himself this term and stood with the easy confidence of someone who had discovered that survival had made them stronger rather than less. At Luna, who was looking at Harry with her particular quality of seeing things adjacent to what everyone else was seeing and finding those things more interesting. At Ginny. Ginny was looking at him with an expression he'd been not examining all term and was done not examining. It was the look of someone who had been paying very close attention for a very long time and who had drawn their conclusions and was waiting for him to catch up. He held her eyes for a moment longer than was strictly friendship explainable. She raised one eyebrow. A very small movement. Entirely contained. Completely clear. He decided that was a conversation for somewhere that wasn't the front steps in the aftermath of a confrontation with Voldemort, and filed it under, soon. Definitely soon. Right, he said, to the general gathering. Everybody back inside. It's November and it's 3 in the morning. Are you seriously telling us to go to bed? Ron said. Yes, Harry said. After that. There's nothing left to do tonight, Harry said. He's gone. The perimeter's intact. Robards has it covered. The thing that needed to happen, happened. What thing? Hermione said. I'll explain in the morning, Harry said. With tea. Lots of tea. She looked at him for a long moment, running the calculation of whether morning with tea was a sufficient timeline for the information she required. Fine, she said. But I have 17 questions. I know you do, Harry said. They went inside. He was almost at the doors when Dumbledore's voice came from behind him. Quiet. Just for him. Harry. He stopped. Turned. Dumbledore was standing at the foot of the steps, looking up at him. The castle light fell on his silver hair and his burgundy robes and his ancient, careful face, and he looked, very briefly, like what he was, an extraordinarily old man who had been carrying an extraordinary weight for a very long time and was feeling, in this specific moment, the slight loosening of it. Your mother, he said, would have, there are not sufficient words. Harry looked at him. I know, he said. And then, because it was true and he had decided that true things were worth saying, thank you. For the sessions. For the honesty, when it came. A pause. For the pastries on Privet Drive. Dumbledore's expression did the thing it did sometimes, the slight unguarding, the genuine warmth behind the careful management of it. The bakery on Magnolia Road is excellent, he said. I've been going back. I know, Harry said. The owner mentioned you. Apparently you told her croissants were the finest in Surrey. They are, Dumbledore said, with complete conviction. Harry almost laughed. Almost. He went inside. The common room was chaos, the entire DA plus most of Gryffindor House awake and crowded into the orange and gold warmth of it, the fire built high, everyone talking over everyone else. Mrs. Weasley had somehow arrived, which was either magical or entirely in character, and was pressing food at people with the focused energy of someone who expressed love through the active prevention of hunger. She saw Harry and crossed the room and held him by the face with both hands, just for a moment, just the specific gesture of it, and looked at him, and whatever she saw settled something in her, and she released him and immediately started telling someone else to sit down and eat something. Ron appeared at his elbow with 2 cups of tea. Okay, Ron said. Short version. What happened? Short version, Harry said. I showed him the truth. And the longer version? Involves Mira Aldridge and a corridor and 60 years of architecture and the specific moment a person becomes who they are. Harry took his tea. That version takes a while. Ron considered this. Morning, he said. Morning, Harry agreed. He sat in the window seat, the one that looked out over the grounds, the dark lake, the forest, the November sky beginning, very faintly at its eastern edge, to separate from true black into something a shade lighter, and drank his tea. He could feel the castle around him. Its old attention, its stone warmth, the 700 lives it was currently holding. He let the reception go wide, just for a moment, just to feel it, and what came back to him was the full, complex, human texture of all of it, the relief and the excitement and the residual fear and the specific warm chaos of people who had been frightened together and were now together on the other side of it. And underneath all of that, from somewhere in the grounds, very distant, at the absolute edge of range, the signal he'd been tracking since July. Moving away now. Diminishing. Not gone yet, but moving in a direction that felt like resolution rather than retreat. Tom Riddle at 11. The world reaching back. Harry put his hand flat on the cold glass of the window. He'd won nothing tonight. He knew that with complete clarity. The Horcruxes existed. The Death Eaters were intact. The war was not over and would not be over for a long time, and the road between here and over was full of things he couldn't see yet and couldn't predict. Voldemort had not been defeated. Had not been turned, had not repented, was not going to write him a letter expressing regret. What had happened was smaller than that. And larger. He had shown a man the true shape of what he was, and the man had looked, and that look was permanent now, stitched into him in the way that genuine clarity was always permanent once it arrived, because you couldn't unknow something you'd actually seen, not really, not even with 60 years of architecture to hide behind. The crack was there. What Voldemort did with the crack, whether he built over it again, faster and harder and more desperately than before, or whether something in it eventually reached the original wound and the boy who had put that wound away in 1944 and the memory of one moment of real, uncomplicated connection, that was not Harry's to control. It was Voldemort's. Harry was not responsible for what anyone chose to do with the truth. He was only responsible for offering it. That was what the ability was. That was what it had always been, in its quiet, unexamined form, in every DA lesson, every terrified explanation of what was real that the Ministry tried to suppress, every moment someone had felt what he felt and understood something they hadn't understood before. He had been doing this his whole life. He had always been doing this. He was only now beginning to understand it as a gift rather than a burden. The difference between carrying the truth of your experience as a weight and carrying it as a light. He thought about the cupboard. He thought about Sirius. He thought about Lily Potter standing beside fire. He thought, I am not done. This is not the end of anything. But it is the end of pretending I am less than I am, which is the beginning of everything useful. He finished his tea. Ginny appeared beside him, not startling, the reception giving him the warm, specific signal of her approach, and sat in the other corner of the window seat with her own cup and her drawn-up knees and the comfortable self-containment she always carried, and they sat in the window and watched the November grounds in companionable silence for a while. I felt it, she said eventually. From up here. What you projected at him. You could feel it at this distance. Harry said. There was a moment, she said, when the whole castle went, I don't know how to describe it. Quiet. Like something that had been buzzing stopped. She looked at him. That was you? That was the truth-neutral form, Harry said. Clean enough. Wide enough. What did you show him? Harry looked at the lake. The first time he felt magic, he said. The first time the world reached back. She was quiet for a moment. That's a devastating thing to show someone. Yes, Harry said. Because it means it didn't have to be this way, she said. Showing him that means he has to look at all the choices between then and now. Yes. She looked at him. Her eyes in the firelight were the particular warm brown that he'd been carefully not examining since September and was done not examining. You're not going to gloat about it, she said. No. Or present it as a victory. It isn't, he said. Not yet. But you're not worried, she said. Not in the way I was before, Harry said honestly. I'm concerned. I know what's still to come. But no. Not worried in that specific old way. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the window. Good, she said. He leaned his head back against the cold glass. The fire behind them was warm. The common room was noisy and alive and full of people he loved in various proportions. The November sky outside was showing its first concession toward morning, the eastern edge genuinely lighter now, gray becoming gray-blue, becoming something with more warmth in it. Ginny, he said. Can we, he paused. I'd like to talk. Not about Voldemort. Just, talk. She looked at him with the half-smile of someone who has been waiting for someone to catch up and is choosing not to make a thing of how long it took. Yes, she said. We can do that. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she confirmed. Something settled. He hadn't known how much he'd needed that to settle until it did. The morning was coming in properly now, the sky through the window going from gray-blue to the first pale watercolor wash of dawn, the kind of light that didn't make promises about the day but suggested it would be worth attending. Below on the grounds the lake was going from black to pewter to something with actual color in it. The forest was still the forest, opaque, certain of itself. And from the direction of Hogsmeade, from somewhere past the boundary of the wards, from the specific location on Harry's awareness where the distant signal had been slowly resolving towards silence all night, gone. Mira Aldrich. 1963 to this morning, in the east corridor of Hogwarts, in the dark, watching a student she'd failed for 60 years until someone was ready to hear the truth about him. Done. Harry felt it, the specific completion of it, the way an absence arrived when something had finished. Rest, he said quietly, to no one in particular, to the window and the morning and the specific direction of the east corridor. The common room was warm around him. His friends were in it. The world outside was fully arriving now, the dawn fully committed, the last of the dark retreating. He had 16 years of material. He was only 16 years old. He had everything still to do. The Horcruxes. The war. The long road between here and whatever came after. He had laws still coming, he could feel that, not specifically but generally, the way you felt weather, and he had the shape of the grief from Sirius that he'd been carrying since July still unfinished and probably would be for a long time. He had Ron's laughter and Hermione's 17 questions and Neville becoming himself and Luna seeing sideways and Mrs. Weasley pressing food at people and Dumbledore and his impossible burgundy robes walking down Magnolia Road to a bakery. He had Ginny, in the window seat, tomorrow. He had the ability, the effective transference, the tide, the warmth, the clarity, the truth-neutral form that could reach under 60 years of architecture and find what was still alive underneath. He had his mother's gift, burning in him like a candle that difficult things couldn't reach. He had himself. Clearly. Undiminished. Without apology. He watched the sun come up over the lake and thought, enough. Not enough as in finished. Enough as in, this is what I have and it is sufficient and I am not afraid and I am not done and I am, against everything, in spite of everything, because of everything, I am here. Enough. The fire crackled behind him. Hedwig arrived at the window, she'd found her way down from the dormitory somehow, because she always did, and tapped the glass imperiously until he opened it, and she came in and settled on his shoulder with her particular quality of dignified, personal loyalty. Harry put his hand up and she nipped his finger gently, and the morning arrived, and he let it.